just look like The Walking Dead, for like 10 minutes. I have this thing where if I have, and it isn't to your studio, it's not a long distance, but after a day of work, and then trying to organize all of this stuff, and then driving to someplace I'm not used to driving to, by the time I got to your parking lot, I had been watching the map and listening to the radio and thinking about what we were going to try to accomplish. And so I opened the door, and Joe's there. He's got the camera in my face, and I'm just like, I feel like I just fell in from a wormhole someplace.
It's my favorite thing to do.
And I have no idea where I am or why I'm here. And Joe's going, okay, well, what are we doing today? And I'm like, I don't know.
I was amazed when you opened the car, though, that there was all that stuff in there. And I felt really bad that I didn't give you a hand loading it, much less taking it out. I mean, but you can always judge a good car by how many half stacks you can get in there, right?
Ah, yeah.
Yeah, well,
yes.
That what the Matrix, you can get 3 412 cabs and 3 heads and 3 guitars and mic stands and lunch.
Full on back line.
and you can, maybe if you're of a mind to, you might even be able to squeeze a small hitchhiker in there on the way.
Brendan says this feels like an AA meeting.
Well,
kinda.
Feels
hey,
like...
everybody, how's it going?
Oh, we're on.
Yeah, we're on.
Oh, jeez.
Where are we?
Yeah, I just feel like, just like I did when I got out of the car at your
Deja vu?
Oh, we're here. Oh, we're here? Oh, we're here.
We're here. Hello, everyone.
And the fun part is we didn't have to, like, I haven't seen anybody go, I can't hear the mic.
Yeah, well, we can do that. You ready? I'm going to mute everything. Ready?
I saw the one, where
Well, that's kind of like...
So just in keeping...
It was picking up all the guitars, so you were turning it off and on. But
one time we came on, and we actually made sure we were doing it correctly, and then we just went...
Yeah, we were mouthing it.
Oh, the mics are off again. Ha 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 ha.
But we're picking up drinks and toasting, so you can hear the glasses clicking together. So anybody that was really paying attention would go, oh, wait a minute, they're just screwing with us now. So.
Couple of clowns. Hey, Joe.
How's it going, Joe?
It's going well.
How's it going,
Joe?
What? How's it going, Joe?
You're an honorary Joe this evening, Steve.
Yeah, the 3 Joes.
3 Joes.
Yeah.
If you're ever in Kansas City, 4 Jacks and a Jill.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've had an eventful weekend, and Joe is always working like a mad fool.
Wait, which one?
Well, both of you actually.
Both of us,
Well, I just want to make sure we're talking to which Joe we're talking about.
How about JB?
Yeah.
I'll just be
okay. All right.
You're evil.
And
evil.
How about EJ? Out of the blue, he texts me and he's like asking about Fanes, and then a conversation starts, and he's like, "Yeah, I have a 100-watt Hiwatt
this thing sucks.
that I don't love." You were very nice. I don't love it, and which in recording studio producer / engineer talk is an extremely polite way of saying, get that piece of shit out of my sight.
No, what am I going to do with it?
Yeah.
And everyone said that you were the guy to talk to, and there it goes. So I was like, please help.
And so we went over there and we played around with stuff, and the best part of it was we all walked away with something.
Oh, huge. I did.
It wasn't like me walking in going, okay, this is going to be the solution to the whole... I learned stuff.
We've been through this thing with Hiwatts before. Like, I've been through it with you just for stuff for the channel. And still, that was a big eye-opener for me.
We always peel back a layer.
Yeah.
Somewhere along the line. And
I think we were all in there going, whoa.
It's because we're always in a different space in time about what we're thinking about in the whole realm of the work that we're doing. A particular piece of knowledge.
It's like different drugs we're also taking in a particular.
Yeah, exactly. But but that's true. Different levels of paying attention to a detail that the last time you were having this experience, you were asking yourself a different set of questions about what you were doing.
Yeah, yeah.
And so the relevancy changes, and then you peel back a layer, and then you peel back a layer, and then you peel back a layer. One of the things that dawned on me after we were like having a conversation about your specific amp, I went, oh, that's right. This is the amp that I was using when I was playing at the Whiskey in 1980, exactly 1980, with this pop band.
You weren't playing punk.
It was a side project. I was a hired gun for this female artist that had a single out, and then I remembered, because it was a 2-input one, and I had bought and sold DR103s because I loved it, and then I hated it, got rid of it, and then I loved it again, got another one, and so I recycled.
You're intimidating.
I recycled 6 or 7. Well, this was in the 80s when they were all over the place cheap. You could $200, $300, $400 would get you a really clean DR103.
But then you still need to know what to do with it.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
I
And
didn't even know there was 2 and 4 input versions.
Yeah,
I just
and at
saw
that time-
103, I was like, okay, that's got to be the one.
Yeah,
at that time, it never even occurred to me that there was anything special associated with the difference between the 2 and the 4 input. They were just, one had 2 and one had 4.
Okay, so before we go on, and you talked about it in the video that we're about to put out, but real quickly, what is the fundamental difference between those two? Is there a fundamental difference, or would you say it's a large? Because,
well, see, but the problem is there's other changes in the circuit, so that the fundamental difference between 2 input and 4 input, it shrinks in importance compared to all the other stuff that follows it in the amp.
Okay.
However, in and of itself, the 4 inputs, the two that you use most often, the hotter inputs, are the 2 inputs on the 2 input version. The other 2 inputs are the lower level versions of those, which cut the incoming signal level 3 dB.
And nobody's using those.
Nobody ever uses it. The only time you do use it is when you use it as a thing to jump the channels.
Oh, I was going to say, as a pedal platform, Steve.
Yeah,
I just wanted to wind them up. We don't even need to go there.
I don't think
I just know how much you hate that term.
I don't think I have the energy to get one.
All right, let's not do that one.
But
Jumping them is one of those things where I always used to jump 4 input Marshalls.
Sure.
But since I don't have a 4 input Hiwatt, I didn't even think about jumping the channels. And Phil Cavano from Monster Magnet, when he was like, "Hey man, you ever just use a Y cable?" And I was like, I did it on a Sovtek MiG 50 ages ago. But I liked it, but it wasn't something that I was like blown away by, because I was using it just to reamp bass. So I'm just dialing in a cleaner sound anyway. But on guitar, jumping it makes total sense, because it's not coming out of another low input and going back into a high input. Just seemed more cohesive to me. And then when you said you really need to jump these channels, I was like,
that's when it became
the
night
moment.
and day, because I'm kind of giving away a little bit of what happens in the video, but it was kind of like, okay, this 7980 Hiwatt DR103 sucks. That was your impression.
It's terrible.
And then Steve went, okay, did you run it like this? Yeah, let's listen to it that way. It's like, yeah, that's ass.
yeah.
And also, did you try it this way? Yeah, that's ass. And it's like, let's jumper them. And it was like, hey, wait a
I
minute.
know, man. And then
That's actually a Hiwatt.
the speaker cable.
Yeah, how
and
about
the
that?
Esquire and the
the
chords.
and the power station and all that.
Yeah.
And like, well, see, because the first thing I do is I start off with, okay, first thing is master volume's going all the way up. We're getting that out of the way right now, which is not the
How do you solve most tonal problems?
turn everything all the way up.
Exactly.
But see, that's not something that you're willing to do right out of the gate on
With
a
the
Hiwatt,
DR103?
because it's just
Yeah.
it's
Kill you.
you know that it's going to. Well, what happened to you?
Guys, I was sitting in front of the amps, and it was in particular with the Sound City cap. And I'd never had this physical sensation before. It was tickling my eardrum. Like, it wasn't like, ow, it was rattling my stuff around, man. I'd never had that before.
It was insanely loud.
Yeah. It was like, ah.
Yeah, it's like you wanted to get a Q-tip and scratch the itch inside
Yeah.
your ear
Yeah.
canal. I've experienced that. I don't experience it so much anymore. And gee, I wonder why.
Yeah. You got that out of the way a long time ago.
Yeah.
It doesn't work that way anymore.
10 more years of DR-103s.
Right, exactly. Yeah, but I mean, your amp, yeah, there's a difference. But in the end, I felt like even though it was discernible, the differences between the proper 103 and yours isn't nearly as big a difference as plugging into these different cabinets. Once you jumpered yours
Yeah.
and had it running properly and you knew what to do with it, the cabinets made a massive difference. And it wasn't like massive, like, sucks, like, they were all really cool. But they were just really, really different flavors.
really
Yeah, well, it's almost like the difference between a 76 JMP and a 78 JMP that has 6550s in it. There's this personality difference that at first blush you hate it because it's not like the other one. But then after everybody sort of gets over that, it becomes a model unto itself.
But you're still going. It's got the Marshall sauce. It's still a Marshall.
Yeah. The trouble with the two-holer DR-103 is, and I can sort of relate to this sort of mentalities. I don't think David Reeves gave a rat's ass if you comprehended the transition and the new way that you would have to approach it to get it to do what you were used to. He would just, his attitude would be more like, well, this one's better, so piss off.
So, competition, you versus Dave Reeves in the Malcontent category. Who wins?
Well, I've told this story before, but of David Reeves at a NAMM show. It was either a NAMM show or a Germany show where somebody's explaining to him, how nice it would be to have a feature or two features, something like a little more overdrive or something to make the Hiwatt more palatable to players that wanted overdrive. And he patiently listened and nodded and blah, blah, blah. And then when the guy was all done, his response was, then it won't be a Hiwatt, would it? And then turned around and walked away.
Wow.
I love it.
So I think he's got me beat.
Yeah.
See, I would sit there and lock horns with you and try to like muscle you into my way of thinking.
You would have the discussion. You wouldn't just drop a line and then turn your back.
Yeah.
And split.
Yeah. Reeves would
pretty
just be
funny.
like, there's got to be a beer around here somewhere.
You're preventing me from the bar.
Yeah.
Step aside, young man.
Yeah. or they're explaining to you what you could do, and he goes,
Yeah.
well, here's a Hiwatt.
Yeah.
Well, what if you can do? Here's a Hiwatt.
Yeah. That was
This
his
is what I
version.
make.
That was his interpretation of blocking distortion. You're
Whoa.
talking about distortion, and you're blocking me from going to the bar.
Right, exactly.
I love it.
I like that.
I can relate to that.
Joe Cad.
By the way, that was interesting to hear blocking distortion again when you were demonstrating that.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's the broken amp sound for sure.
Ooh, yeah, that was like, I think I know what you guys are objecting to, and here's how we set it to do that. And I played one chord, and you like all went.
Yeah, but I think you did it on both channels. You're like, here it is on the normal channel, and then on the bright.
And I combined them to make sure that I could get that warm fuzzy feeling all the way home.
I didn't know I was getting blocking distortion when I was playing it. Because I was like, man, this is just
Like,
horrid.
is this blocking distortion or just broken distortion? Like broken amp sound.
After all these years, who knew that gem has been sitting there? But it came down to the fanes, really.
How long have you owned that amp?
20 plus years.
Wow. Oh, I thought it was kind of a newer acquisition.
No, it's one of those things that just sits on the shelf the whole time, and
You go, I have a Hiwatt.
Well, you come up with there's a part and you're just like, oh man, this would be great, like a Pete Townsend type thing, and then you pull the Hiwatt out, you get all excited, and you're like, oh, this thing sucks.
Yeah, moving
But
on.
I never coupled it with the right goods until
Yeah.
you showed up with 3 cabinets.
There is a lot to that.
And they were all feigned. You know, the one thing we didn't do was have like the 4th Celestion loaded cab and go, all right, let's just do this and listen to that, because I've actually never done that.
It's terrible.
Okay, I
But if
imagine.
you want to come by tomorrow, I'll demonstrate it.
You want to come hear some bad tone? Come on over.
I got a
That's your
room full of it.
recipe.
Not a match made in heaven, I can tell you that. I mean, I love all kinds of speakers. I can find merit in an Eminence. I can find merit in a Goodman's. I can find merit in all kinds of weird stuff.
No, every time we've talked, your approach, or at least you seem like, dude, there's a use for everything. Even broken amp sound. Like,
Yeah.
I'm going to use that at some point. I will use that.
One
It will be
man's
the
trash
appropriate
is
thing.
another man's treasure. That's my firm belief.
That's making
it goes into your
records.
Rolodex.
Yeah.
And then one day you're like working with an artist and you just like, your brain goes, "Gah, I know what this needs."
Yeah, because it's not like you're going, this is my, I'm walking out on stage, I'm playing an entire set, and this is my sound. No, you're going, we're in a little breakdown in this tune. We need this little goofy ass thing to come in. Like, grab that Rockman.
Yeah, I mean, actually, it's just surprising to know that, like, the key to a lot of guitar sounds might be just blending the Rockman in, or like in Soundgarden, they always blend it in a small amp as well. Just that extra grit. People run mattresses behind there, you know, to
Yeah,
have
for
clarity
the
and
chimey,
stuff.
yeah.
So whatever works. I mean, Dave Jordan was a big splitter of amplifiers.
And do you find yourself being into the split, or do you track separate tones more, or is it just?
When it was strictly 24-track tape, I split maybe 2 amps, sometimes 3, but I always combine down to 1 track. But lately, with the digital world, sometimes I can have a little more control of each amp. So, because sometimes it's just okay. The chorus might sound good with a little more of this one,
Oh, I see.
or a little less of this one. But I'm never putting separate microphones on separate tracks, ever.
Oh,
If I have 2 mics on a 4x12, those 2 mics go down to 1 track. There it is.
okay. And so when you're getting sounds, you're going, keep playing until you get it right where you want it, and then we're committing to that, and that's what I'm recording on that track. And that's that.
Well, yeah, it's like I always tell them to play Smoke on the Water first, and then I go and start moving mics around until I feel the mics are in a decent place. Or sometimes I go out there and say, just play, and then hit Smoke on the Water when you think it sounds good.
Okay.
And then they might rip into some Blackmore, and I'm like, I stop, I go in and listen, and we kind of dial in the sound to the track.
Yeah.
Because that's even more important. You know, we talk about it.
Right.
I soloed a kick drum once, worked on it for hours. It was the most ungodly kick drum I've ever heard in my life, and then I unsoloed it, and it was the worst kick drum I've ever heard in my life. So,
You're like, if I was making a kick drum album, this is
it.
Yeah, man.
But, so, you know, I mean, you play the part, you dial in the sound for the part, and for
Yeah.
the player, and sometimes you need to adjust for sections or for
yeah.
technique or whatever.
Yeah.
Jordan bailed me out one time. I was on a session for an artist that he was producing, and I had my Esquire, but I had an orange squeezer compressor in it,
Yeah.
and I put it in there. I don't know why I put it in there. I put it in there because I thought it made sense to put it in there at the time that I did that. I was still pretty green and trying any stupid thing I could think of, but I put it in there.
You're still
And,
trying it.
and the artist kind of
Good.
teased me about the sound of the Esquire, you know, that thin little trebly, you know, what is that? What's going on with that guitar? But he liked when I did a sort of Dwayne Eddy vibe out of that thing. He liked that, but any on the other part of it, he teased me about the sound all the time.
Okay.
And we're in the control room, and I pull out my Esquire and I plug it in my little pedal board, and I had a DR103 and a Hiwatt cabinet with the pressed frame fanes, which were like in this one period, that's a particularly good example of a Fane speaker. It actually sounds better than
What
the
was the
cast
wattage
frame
rating
ones.
on
And I
those?
think they were like 60-watt speakers,
Huh.
between 50 and 70. But I had it all set up, and the artist is like, yeah, can you like dial back that treble shit, you know? And Jordan goes,
Joe's just laughing.
Jordan
So
just
many
goes,
good
I
stories
don't know,
like
hold
this."
on. I don't know, hold on a second. I think I can do something with that. And he made this beautiful, wide, sparkling, gorgeous thing come out of the monitors. And I was,
Do you turn around and look at you, or do you look at the artist?
I was like, you know, I was like Tweety Bird with the dog behind me, you know, looking at the cat.
The sound inspires the player a lot of times.
Hey, this is a good question, Joe. Do you mind answering this sucker here? That's a good question. You're handling a lot of
That's a really
stuff,
good
and you
question.
are the phase king.
If there's something out of phase, I'm going to pick it.
Uh-huh. Because you're a
So-
cheeky American.
You cheeky American.
We'll have to fill them in on that story too.
There always has to be a reference point to start with. I mean, later on in life, I got these things that were actually phase checkers, phase poppers. You can plug your guitar cable into it. It feeds your amp. It spits out a pop, a DC pop.
And then you
put
can
the
see it?
receiver in front of the speaker, and you see a plus or minus sign. And
Oh.
that says it's positive or negative.
Right.
So that's one. But then you have to look at the microphone. So I've had many occasions where you're looking at two 57s and one's out of phase. Could be the mic, could be the cable. You check your cables, you check your mic pre's. So basically to the very end of the chain, the monitors that I'm listening to is where I'm listening with the phase popper. But before the phase popper, there's Keith Olsen, very famous producer.
Yeah.
He would just have the amp hiss, and he would put the mic, you know, in the center or where the hiss was really loud. Then he'd put another mic up, and he would flip the phase on the console, and he would move it around till it nulls out, or he would move it around till it was super loud, and then he would null it out, you know, and then you can dial in two microphones. So there's always the one reference. Maybe that's the short answer for the long story. And then from that, so that's one cabinet. I'm also a firm believer in a mic per speaker. I'll never mic two mics on a speaker,
Interesting.
because it's
Huh.
always, there's a source coming out of speaker going into two microphones, so there's going to be phase issues happening in the two mics. Not that there isn't phase issues when you have two mics on two speakers, but the sound coming into one mic and the sound coming into this other mic from a different speaker is much less phasey, and
Got
much
it.
more phase coherent if you're using two microphones on two speakers. Plus you get the color of the mic, so you have your 421 or your whatever microphone, that's your thickness, and you have a microphone that's your point,
Yeah.
and you blend those two. And then once you sort that out, that's amp number one. Then you look at amp number two, and then amp number two needs to be in phase with amp number one. So
Yeah.
on my guitar splitter, I have phase switches, and it's important there because there is no real standard on amps. If you're using an extra half tube stage, it's out of phase. If you're using an effects loop, a lot of times it's out of phase. If you're using a pedal, sometimes the pedal's out of phase. So you might, very interesting thing is like tube pedals have two channels. As you kick in the second channel, use
Yeah.
the other half of the tube. So you're in phase until you kick in the other side, then you're out of phase, which isn't a huge ordeal if you're using a single, you know, cabinet. But if you're using a single source like a Marshall and then channel switching a second amp to it, you might actually be flipping your other amp in and out of phase.
Wow.
And that affects the room as well. So I'm not sure if I answered your question
No,
properly,
that's
but-
all really interesting stuff.
Well, one thing you just did, which I love, is okay. You heard it first on this show. All those pictures that you see of companies that post pictures of here, we're modeling a speaker cabinet to make an IR out of it with 19 mics on one speaker. You just like laid waste to that whole concept as being just the poor lazy man's way of generating an IR, and which is interesting because the IRs that Michael Nielsen made for us, he doesn't do that. He mics separate speakers, and he's got one of those little robot things that moves the mic around and stuff. So I'm always wondering what people are going to think of the IRs and the PLIR, because none of them are Celestians.
Yeah.
And when we released that product, I was just like waiting for the 8 million why no vintage 30 email, and it hasn't happened.
Never happened. Yeah, interesting.
Because though they're mostly feigned speakers, it's the part of it is that the reactive load is there to cause the amplifier to fake itself into thinking that it's hooked into a cabinet that's got a certain kind of a resonant peak and dip structure, because you can change that with the mini toggles. And then on top of that, Michael did just such a superb job of making the IRs that you don't listen to him and go, well, that's a sucky sounding. You can't say it's not a sucky sounding anything.
He did a great job of making the IRs, and he also did an excellent job of vetting the best ones.
That's true.
Because he's got a great ear, and he didn't say, here, listen to 500 things and you decide. He's like, look, these are really the ones I can
That was
come
a
back
big
to.
fear for me, because at the time that he was doing that project, you were swamped with shit. I was swamped with shit, and all of us were looking.
But I was in a million recording projects, so when he sent them over, I was able to use them. And I'll be damned, like the curated ones that he sent over, it was like, these are all very usable.
And because I really trust your ears, and I really trust his ears, I had the luxury of just, guys, give me your 10 favorite ones and get the fuck away from me. It was kind of like that. Because I already had the rest of that PLIR to work out the real fine details, the levels and stuff like that. Yeah. Joe gave us some feedback about level structure, and we actually we got into a little discussion about the phase, your perception of the phase relationship of the IRs. You mentioned. I thought it was really funny. You listened to it and you were like, I wonder if that's out of phase on the IR itself. And I'm like, did we do something really stupid? And you were like going through and you had I think you were using Pro Tools to examine that or something like that. And I was just like,
it was awesome.
I was like a kid. I was like a kid sitting in the chair outside the principal's office waiting to get called in. That's how I felt. And at the end, I just said, okay, well, he was busy. We had to leave. We left. And like 2 or 3 days later, I'm starting to get text. Yeah, this is really working for me.
Well, it felt good to play. That was the thing. Like, I don't know if anybody really can, understand, understand phase by itself. It's when it becomes absolute polarity and the speaker is sucking or pushing, that's a whole nother concept. And the speaker pushing at a positive peak is very much more coherent than a speaker sucking in when there's a positive peak, which means something's out of phase somewhere, because you get all this weird distortion that, I remember just struggling with a mix a long time ago and just wondering why I could never get it to be tight and punchy.
This is before you'd gone down that
Before I'd gone down the rabbit hole. I've always been a rabbit hole of phase, but this is absolute polarity now, where I'm just going, hang on a second. And with a simple battery, you can take a 9-volt battery and take your guitar cable or your speaker cable and just, hold the negative to the sleeve and tap the positive to the tip and get a flashlight and look and see if your speaker's moving forward. Because I've actually wired up some speakers before that. Maybe they were made on a Monday or a Friday ready to go drinking or something, where it says plus and minus, but the speaker actually is sucking in instead of pushing.
Oh,
when the voice coil's wired out of phase.
Whoa. So do you remember what was going on in that mix that you were struggling with?
It was the speakers were sucking in when they should have been pushing. So I just put, it was like a pin 2 power amp or a pin 3 power amp. And so the positive waveform of my mix, or a kick drum, was, doing this, and it should have been pushing the speaker, but instead it was sucking the speaker in. And it's actually even crazier. Here's a really crazy story. Is a famous mastering engineer named Alan Yoshida, and I had mixed a record, and I mixed most of it in one studio, and I mixed one song in another studio. So obviously it's going to sound a little different, but he was really struggling with this one song, and he couldn't figure out why. I mean, a mix is a mix, right? So he was like, "Did you mix this on another tape machine?" And I said, "Yeah, actually." I mixed it on a Ampex, and the rest of the record's on a Studer. He goes, "Oh, well, there you go." And I'm like, this is like my first concept of absolute polarity, and basically, the American standard was pin 2, and the European standard was pin 3 hot on an XLR cable. So he just flipped the phase of the one mix, and it just completely opened up.
Okay, this is the Shazam switch.
Right. So when he's talking about a tip positive power amplifier, he's talking about a power amp that has XLR inputs, and I don't think there's ever been a standardization on XLRs as to whether pin 2 is hot, 3 is neutral, or 3 is hot and 2 is neutral. It's always been sort of perceived as across the pond it's one way, and over here it's another way, and over history it's just kind of converged that sort of both ways are right, and in some cases both ways can be considered wrong. So what really is right, and what's really, at the end of the day, what's really right is all the gear that you're working with at any given particular time have to be done one way or the other way, or you run into problems.
And even crazier, I have a transient designer SPL 2-channel, and one side is out of phase with the other. And so I figured maybe it's me. So I put the 2 XLRs together, and it's not, bypassing the unit. And then I opened the unit and looked at the wires, and the blue wire went to the same place that the blue wire went. So it wasn't the wiring of the XLRs in and out, but something in the circuit got flipped somewhere. So from the factory, no offense against SPL, because I still have it, and there's just a big out of phase sign on it because I didn't feel like wiring it the other way. But when I go through that side, I just flip the phase. Who cares?
Oh, that's interesting.
But you're so zeroed in on that well, when you hear it, you automatically recognize it when that is happening. It just like stands out to you like having somebody throwing a snowball in your face. You know right then and there what's going on and why. And you told us a little anecdote yesterday about the mastering guy the disc cutting guy that you.
The guy cut some vinyl, and I mean when I'm listening to test pressing, so there's a certain. I mean, I want it to be as good as the mix, obviously. So there's the mix, and they did a test pressing, sent me the test pressing. I converted the test pressing with a high dollar A to D phono preamp, and it just sounded weird to me. And then I zoomed in on the waveforms, and after I lined them all up, I'm like, this thing's out of absolute polarity. So
180 degrees out of
180
phase.
degrees.
Somebody's getting a phone call.
So, well, then I thought it was me. I'm like, maybe something happened. Maybe my cartridge is wired wrong.
See, what you know what a professional does?
Well,
they blame themselves first, and like when I'm doing testing stuff, if something isn't lining up right, first, okay, is it just because of the hangover? Did I hook up my test equipment wrong? Am I on
one rogue cable somewhere?
Am I on solid ground?
And then we all go back to at the bottom of this, I am just a dumb guitar player.
Yeah, exactly.
That's where it all starts.
So you clean first. You do all that house cleaning, and then
you go, all right, wait. I go one step further. I'm going to buy another phono preamp.
Oh yeah, throw money at it.
Then I'm going to buy another turntable, and then I'm going to have it set up properly and make sure that I have a test pressing, a playback test pressing that shows that it does a positive waveform, so I can verify that it's not my chain. Although I went digital and analog, and it wasn't I knew at that point it wasn't my chain, but the last thing I'll do is want to accuse some high dollar professional, and in the end, he was completely wrong. I was completely right, and he's probably been making test pressings for the last 50 years on an absolutely out of phase
cutting edge. And he called
Thanks
you
for that question, Adam.
and he calls you a cheeky
Called me
American
the cheeky American.
for calling him out.
Hey, now look, we can continue with this discussion, but we have some alcohol here,
Well, we
should start drinking it.
We have a little rabbit hole to go down here because Joe even like risks his relationship with his mother to like try to push the envelope and.
Oh, I can just smell that.
All right, well, this is some
that's
homemade
joy.
limoncello.
Homemade limoncello.
Yeah.
And what is homemade limoncello?
Well, basically, in Italy...
Did you check the phase?
The phase is all downhill. Basically, it's lemon peels from Meyer lemons. Usually, it's Amalfi Coast. Not the pith part, the white stuff. So you cut the lemon peel off, you soak it in either 100% vodka.
So you're talking about the outer skin?
The outer skin only. Or 120 proof grain. So my first round, my friend Aaron came over with a bunch of Meyer lemons, and I was like, what are we going to do with all these lemons? And let's make some limoncello. So we both went in and made limoncello at the same time, and we did it with pure grain alcohol, and then instead of sweetening it with sugar, we sweetened it with Italian honey.
Yeah.
So, and I brought some over to my mom, and she's been making limoncello her whole life, and basically she took one sip and was like, "Get it out of here." That's just way too powerful.
It wasn't this batch.
It wasn't this batch. So this batch, I decided to go one step further. I did the vodka, 100%, 100 proof vodka, and I did it but instead of peeling the lemon, I microplaned it, which I didn't even know what a microplaner is, but I was like, it's a cheese grater, right? So I got my cheese grater out, made sure it didn't smell like cheese, and then I shaved these lemons down so it was like in one day it looked like a bad urinary tract infection. It was so...
I don't even know what a good urinary tract infection is.
Good point.
It did look like a urinary tract infection. It was like... anyway, it was super dark, and then I diluted it with a little bit of water, and I used sugar in this batch, and this is the vodka sugar batch.
All right.
With a microplaner.
Do you see this, Bear? What he's saying? This is
highlighted.
That is as deep divey as you can get. Meyer zest disparaged. Like, yeah, those.
I use Myers.
All right, but we're about to try it. Yeah.
Well, yeah. There's a place for everything.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thanks for having me on.
All right.
All right.
Okay, I can definitely taste the Myers lemon
Very
flavor.
smooth. The grain, she's right, the grain is hardcore, but it is really good. And when I make another round, we'll reconvene.
Okay, but this is the grain alcohol?
This is the 100 proof vodka.
This
100 proof
is
vodka.
not what I expected.
Is that what kind of vodka?
It's actually Smirnoff is the only one that's 9 times distilled pure. So it's the most powerful vodka you can buy. And grain is 120 proof.
And grain is just what, White Lightning or
it's like moonshine. So
it's
basically flavored moonshine.
Flavored moonshine. What was that what is that grain alcohol that comes in the big jug? What's it called?
Everclear.
Everclear.
Yeah, that's what it is. It is Everclear.
Oh,
yeah.
okay.
So it's Everclear with honey, Sicilian honey, that's fermented from flowers, because you can buy all different kinds of honey as well. You know, mm-hmm. It's honey flowers from Sicily, so it came from the homeland.
Of course.
I figured you might as well go all the way.
That's right.
And this is Smirnoff, 100 proof, and a little bit of sugar and a little bit of water to dilute it.
Mm-hmm. This is a smooth ride.
Smooth! But this one's microplaned. It's not peeled.
Yeah.
So, microplaning is my favorite new word, actually.
It's my favorite new word now.
The next round is going to be orange.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to trying that. This is wonderful.
Now, we were talking about this before we came on. You have to babysit this thing for an entire month, right?
Yeah, this is peel it, soak it in the booze, get yourself your nice airtight mason jar, and you know, we would text my friend Aaron. We would text all the time. He's a great drummer. He scores trailers and stuff. He lives down the street from me now, which is even more awesome. So, hey man, did you shake your limoncello today? Yeah, man, check mine out. And just text each other back and forth, and every day, twice a day, you're shaking that thing, and you're making you're making the oils from the skin and the alcohol, soak up. They marry together, and then after a month of that is when you start put the honey in or the sugar, whatever you're gonna sweeten it with. Then you shake that every day until it gets absorbed in there, and then you go right to the freezer with it, and it doesn't freeze because it's pure booze at this point. And then you enjoy it and feel like Danny DeVito. I think he got so hammered on limoncello once. It's like he must have been the grand kind, the Everclear.
It just gives whole new meaning to my favorite Albert Collins quote. I saw Albert Collins play live at the Long Beach Blues Festival a long time ago, and he came on really late. His backup band had to cover like 3/4 of the set. He finally comes drifting out. He starts off with this little rap. He plays a couple riffs. He gets on the mic and he goes, "I'm sitting home in my apartment, shaking my thing. You know what I'm talking about?" And then he looks around and he looks at the audience. He goes, "Out of mind is the devil's workshop."
That's like my kitchen, the devil's workshop.
And when you said shaking my thing, I just went, yeah, idle mind is the devil's workshop.
I shook that thing for a month. Then an extra.
So this isn't
delicious.
just something that
That's
you slam
delicious.
out on a weekend.
No. The
ages.
longer you keep it, the better it gets too, because the oil, especially Meyer lemons,
But it's
because they're
not
very oily.
fermenting. It's just
It's just soaking up. I mean, you take the peels out
right.
at some point, so it has to absorb the juice of the lemon, not the juice, but the oil of the
oil,
lemon skin.
right.
Yeah, which is why I thought microplaning it might be cooler, because
But at what point do you take them out? Is this
after 4 weeks, right
4
before
weeks,
you put the
okay.
honey in.
Right before you,
All right.
you come on to Malcontents.
Exactly. Well, yeah.
Wait till he tastes this shit.
Where I was on yesterday, we'd have some grain, but
Oh yeah, because you plowed through.
I plowed through that yesterday. I needed to sleep, so I figured the best way would be.
Well, you were in bad shape on Friday, man.
Yeah, man. It was 45 minutes of sleep.
Yeah,
The dog and the cat, everybody waking up every hour.
You were a good sport for having 0 sleep, man.
Well, I was awake after that first chord, though.
Yeah, but did it tickle your eardrum?
It didn't. But maybe that's a bad thing. 'Cause maybe it should have.
Man, if you would have sat where I sat, it just got in there. It was like a bug in there.
You were in that line of fire, too.
Oh, man.
I
Yeah,
got
you
in
were
the
sitting back farther, and
I'm going to suffer for this art.
I was thinking to myself, I'm not standing in the optimal position to be making any commentary about what's being heard, because I'm way out of the line of fire, but I have to be back there because I'm adjusting and
Sure.
switching things and stuff.
Sure.
And so I just figured, okay, well, you know what? This is going to be for everybody else's benefit, and what they really need to hear is this: how the amp reacts when you play real subtle little clean diads and blah 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 blah. And they also need to hear this wham, and I'm forgetting, oh, that's right, I just murdered everybody in the room. I'm sorry, but I'm not that sorry.
Well, I was actually amazed at how different the reactance of the speakers were, because
The dynamic range, yeah. It would just
plugging
be
in one cabinet and then having to turn it up or down depending
Right.
on another cabinet.
Right.
Yeah.
And then all the way to the wall, you hear all the harmonic saturation and bloom and blah, blah, blah. And I turn the guitar volume down 2 notches and just play an open A chord with 2 strings, and it just sounds like an acoustic guitar.
Well, it's interesting. The old Fane cab is a treasure, for sure. But it can just do one thing at this point.
For the absolute one thing that it will do right.
And that's a hell of a thing to do right.
It's
funny
you know
because
what's malcontent about that cabinet?
Oh.
It's going to do what it's going to do, regardless of who's playing it and what
Right.
you think you're going to do with it. It's going to
Right.
go, no, I'm right here.
right.
I'm right. Well, we need a little bit of. No, you don't. But if I could just push there's other cabinets that'll do that. Bye. It's
That's
just
funny.
It's just really obstinate. In fact, I even was reminded that running at full bore, and running it through the power station. And I kept
But it
turning on.
doesn't do anything else.
I'm just kept.
You give it more and more. It's like, no.
It kept reminding me,
It was
Steve, you should know this by now. What do we have to have this conversation again? You know, it was like that.
Yeah,
I just kept
yeah.
going. All right, yeah. I know.
Yeah.
I actually meant to ask if it was the weave that was part of the sound, because I know basket weave sometimes takes that top off, but everything else is a pretty thick weave. You can't really see in them either. So
Yeah, but that is pretty much dress fabric. I don't know what that grill cloth, where
Like
they
Sound
got
City
that,
grill cloth?
where they got that original sound. It is the flimsiest, lightest, nothing stuff. It's almost like Reeves like grabbed some fabric out of his wife's New Year's Eve outfit or something like that, and used that.
Did you ever touch it, Joe? Like, it's nothing.
Oh yeah,
It's just nothing.
I have a Sound City cabinet, old Sound City cabinet with that same weave on it.
Yeah, it just, you can breathe on it and cut a hole in it.
Hey, I wanted to.
But the other stuff, that's on the Sound City and on the later Hiwatt cabinets, that's a weave. That's a high frequency filter without a doubt.
And when did that go into production?
Well, probably 70, late 68, early 70, 70 something.
Yeah, I did some tests the other day with a microphone and a pop filter on the mic, and it was amazing how just putting the actual pop filter, the foam pop filter on the mic, really, it changed it so much. It was incredible, but not in a bad way.
I was going to ask, in a way that you would go, in a production, let's try this because it does a different thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, a lot of times, the search for the better pop filter isn't really as good as just the pantyhose with the, with a coat hanger.
Yeah.
But this foamy piece on top of a mic, is actually kind of cool. It took the top end off, took the edge off.
Huh. That makes me think of, this is funny, Tom was talking about the Hendrix Maui 1970 gig. And because I'd been paying attention to that gig again recently, Tom, and like a couple weeks ago I was looking into it, and like I'd been checking out that show my entire life, but I didn't think about it. I was in Maui playing some shows last spring, and I totally forgot to think about it then. And so I looked at it retroactively. In that show, they did like a neighborhood away from where I was staying most of the time. I was in Maui. It's like, damn it. Like, I always try and go to all the Hendrix spots in my travels, and I missed that one. But anyway, all that live recording stuff for the Maui gig, he had the big giant foam all over the mic because I think it was super windy that day. And then I heard that Mitch had to recut, which is really crazy, like how you deal with the bleed. But he recut the drums for that live show at Electric Lady.
Wow. Which
I haven't listened to it since I heard that, but that just sounds bananas. I need to go back and listen and see.
Yeah.
There's somebody on Facebook that it just started showing up in my mentions, and it's this person that has all this historical background on all these different Hendrix gigs. It's like they've been sitting on this historical stuff for decades and decades, and now every day
Amanda,
she posts a piece or two from that little trivia about what went on behind the scenes on the shows, and talking about the sound systems, and that they didn't mic the drums.
Wow.
They mic'd the vocals, and
bled through.
and the amps bled through the vocal mics, and there were no mics on the drums, and that's the way it is.
oh,
So it doesn't surprise
John
me that
Ziegler's saying what's up. I
on
know you did a record with him.
on a gig, on an outdoor gig like that, the drums would have to be them. Guitar amps outside, it seems like they bloom, and no matter how loud you turn the amp up at an outdoor gig, it's never too loud. It doesn't
It's
seem
actually
too loud because it's not reflecting off of
Right.
stuff, right?
So it's always
It's
like
just-
bone dry. And like, where's the juice? Where's
It's just,
the juice?
yeah, it doesn't seem too loud, but the only thing that you're not aware of is at this volume you can hear it 8 blocks away, and at this volume you can hear it 16 blocks away. But as far as the audience is concerned, nothing really changed.
Yeah, and some of those Hendrix recordings, it's like the drums, like the live stuff. It's the drums just sound like pancakes,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
They weren't properly recorded or anything.
And one time I took up my 100-watt Hiwatt half stack and put it on the back porch of my house, and I was just playing what I thought was kind of quietly. I just wanted to play outside. It was a nice
Dude,
sunny
you
day.
don't play quietly.
And I was just practicing some chord patterns and stuff, and then I hear this whoop whoop whoop, and I turn around and there's like 2 blocks away. There's a cop down at the end of the street going, "Turn it down."
I knew there's when I lived in Colorado. I had both of these brothers were students of mine for a while, but they had a really, really cool band called Rose Hill Drive. You guys could check them out. Rose Hill Drive actually toured with The Who at one point and Van Halen. But Daniel, the guitar player in the band, he got, when he was like 15, he got the bright idea. It's like, oh, it's the 4th of July. I'm going to wheel my Marshall half stack out on my front porch and just play Star Spangled Banner for the entire neighborhood.
That's awesome.
It is funny because I didn't live in the town that he lived, but I was talking to Daniel about it outside of my lesson room, and another student of mine, Lance, comes by, and he hears us. He's like, oh, now I know who was playing that. Because Lance lived like 5 blocks away. He's like, oh, I heard that, dude. That was you.
That's awesome.
Every time we come up with a new design or a new product and we start demonstrating and stuff, and people always pop up and go, you know what you could do with that? You could like do something with it. You could put a different speaker in it, or you could put 4 more KT88s in it, or you could do this, you could do that. Have you tried this? Have you tried all the stuff that...
Do you say, then it wouldn't be a fraud
Yeah,
now,
exactly.
would it?
Have you tried all the stuff that somebody who just thinks they just get into these gear rabbit holes, and they've got this sort of catalog of things that they would love to hear a manufacturer kind of go through all of their fantasy setups and show everybody how subtle and great all these differences are, when you know that it would just be a huge monumental waste of time. But there are always people that are nutcase enough to really follow that logic through and decide, I'm going to demonstrate to these people that are doing this for a living how much better their stuff could be. There's a lot of that. And it's not a new phenomenon. When I was working in a music store in 1973 or something, and this was shortly after the Acoustic 360 bass amp came out,
Oh, yeah.
The folded horn 18, blah, 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 blah. Well,
We love that amp.
Sir and Vega was just coming out with sound reinforcement gear,
Okay.
and they were really into this folded horn thing.
Okay.
But it wasn't just we're going to make a folded horn cabinet, another one. They were also designing a purpose-built 18-inch speaker that would perfectly complement such a cabinet.
Huh.
Right? So they sent us this 18-inch folded horn thing that was just monstrous, and it had I think it had 2 10s, the little rectangular flat
Yeah.
area in the front.
Yeah.
They put 2 10s in the front of it.
Okay.
Mine's
Yeah.
only 18s.
So
Rear facing.
yours what?
Mine face the rear, but no 10s. Rear facing 18s.
Yeah, the 18 faces back, and this had 2 10s facing
That's
forward for
crazy.
the articulation, because otherwise all you heard was the low end. Well, some guy comes into the shop one day, looks like he'd been hiding in the woods for a year, and he comes in and he says, I've come up with an improvement for that 18-inch folded horn, and would you be interested in hearing a demonstration of it? And I was like, yeah, okay, whatever, it wasn't a busy day, and he's just kind of
Wait, you were just a retail worker?
I
at
was
the
I
store?
was the store manager, and there was
Okay.
nobody there, and it
Alright.
was kind of like early in the afternoon. It was kind of quiet. This music store in a
And
mall.
how well did you know the Serwin Vega stuff? And the
It was
acoustic
relatively new,
stuff? Okay.
and I don't really have the skill to understand what they're really doing yet or trying to accomplish. It's
Okay.
just like, oh, another new thing coming out, right?
All right.
So I said, well, I guess what's the idea? And he says, well, I understand what he's talking about now. I didn't understand what he was talking about at the time, but what he was talking about the 20-foot wavelength, and he was just basically talking about low frequency response and projection and stuff. And I'm like, okay, whatever, you know. So he says, well, I'll be right back in. I'm just got to bring in some stuff. He's in a Volkswagen, first of all.
Wait, the bus?
No,
Just a Beetle?
a Beetle.
A Beetle. Okay.
And so he came in because we had the Serwin Vega line, and so we already had a 18-inch folded horn sitting there on the showroom floor.
Mm-hmm.
So he says, can you give me a hand? And I said, well, okay. So we go out to the parking lot. There's this Beetle with all this sheets of wood in it that are all coated in fiberglass.
Uh-huh.
So there's like 6 pieces of interlocking slats, wood sections, and then he's got all these elastic ties with the hooks on the end.
Oh, yeah.
He's got a handful of those
The bungee cables.
bungee cables,
yeah.
and so we haul all this stuff in, and I'm going like, okay, what are you going to do with all this? So it turns out that he made this like 24-inch horn extension that flayed out vertically and horizontally.
I love him already.
It interlocked on the front of the cab, and he used bungee cables. First of all, you use bungee cables to make this sort of splayed out.
Wait, the bungee cables weren't just to hold this stuff together? It was a part of the apparatus?
It was to hold it. It was to strap the pieces together.
Oh, this guy's a nut.
Because that makes it portable.
Yeah.
So you're going to go to a gig and set up this thing for your bass amp, and once you get the head sat on the cabinet and everything plugged in, then you're going to tip the cabinet back about 20 degrees and put this horn extender on this deep.
Oh, awesome.
And so he builds out this whole
Because
thing.
you definitely need the bass to be
And then we
bigger.
push it on the front of the horn and then bungee it around the back of the cabinet. And by the time it's all set up, he goes, okay. And so we plug it in to an SVT and start playing. And he goes, listen to that. And I'm like, listening to what? The only way that you would hear the effect of that thing is just
20 feet away.
to stand on the other end of the shopping mall, right? And we're in this store, and he's like going, yeah, well, and then so since you can't hear it, he's explaining again about the 30-foot wavelengths and all that, and I'm just like,
That's tough.
I'm like going, what? Where is this guy? He's like out in the. Did you chop down the trees to make these things too? It was really hysterical.
Dude,
Wow.
I actually have
That was my
two-
first
Well,
experience.
probably
with,
did. You're up in Seattle.
Yeah, that was my first experience with a guy that's like, okay, well, I'm going to show these manufacturers what's really what, you know.
Wow.
You know, I have two 360s, and only because.
You're cool.
Well, I can tell you this: I've walked into 2 bars where I've said the bass sound is phenomenal.
Before you knew what was being
Before I knew
played.
it was on stage. I
Oh,
walked in the
yeah.
door of the Lava Lounge, and the bass note hit me, and I was like, "This is the greatest bass sound I've ever heard." Acoustic 360, my friend Chad Bamford cabinet, and then I walked in the Troubadour one day. It was the same exact thing, and then the one record that stands out for me is Soundgarden Super Unknown, because anytime it came on the radio, it just had an extra octave underneath everything, just shit all over everything, right? And Jason Cassaro was one of my mentors, and I'm like, how did you get this bass sound? And he was a big proponent of subharmonic generators and acoustic 360s and filling up the room and miking up the room. So that's where that 30-foot waveform came on.
Wait a minute. Really?
Yeah, he put
He
the
does that on
360.
bass?
Yeah, I mean.
Well, wait a minute. You don't do that, though, typically. Like, you're
I-
doing,
I-
you're doing
well-
3 DI.
DI, clean amp, dirty amp. But when I was doing Fu Manchu, we cut the bass. We were out in Palm Springs making a record. I took the panel off the back of the 360 and fished a microphone right in front of the speaker.
Whoa.
And of course, it was probably being rattled all over the place, but that movement with a DI kind of created a wild phasiness. and distortion on the bass. It was incredible.
Wow.
So, I mean, they're like one man's trash is another man's trash.
Wow, that's interesting.
There are no rules.
I think I was telling you I played with a guy who had a really minty 360 rig for a while, and it was a 68, and I would bring my 68 Super Reverb, and I mean, it was pretty godly, but it was like, let's do photo shoots. We got the pretty old gear.
Mine says Redbone on it.
Oh,
Because they rehearsed at Sound City. Yeah. Evidently, they left their gear behind, and at some point they owed storage money.
Whoa, you have the Redbone
I have the
360?
Redbone cabinet, and it's painted red.
Dude, that is so cool.
And I have, well, my buddy Billy, who worked at Sound City, he bought the other half. But actually, this brings me up to another quick 360 as an aside.
okay.
I saw Bryan Adams open for the Stones as a three-piece, and he played bass, white bass with a white 360, and it was a phenomenal bass sound too. All those Bryan Adams songs that are super produced and as a trio, phenomenal.
Really?
Yeah. With him playing bass to a 360.
Are you sure you didn't just have too much of this?
That
sounds really weird.
It was
I didn't know
incredible,
he
actually.
played bass.
Played bass.
She's like, I'm gonna play
The guitar
bass for
player
the
had
whole
a
tour.
white Les Paul and a white Marshall stack, and the drummer had a white drum kit.
What?
And it was three-piece, and they opened for the Stones. It was
This
at
sounds
the-
like a dream, dude.
It was incredible.
This does not sound
I mean,
like reality.
a good song's a good song in the end, right?
Definitely.
Hey, Jeff,
Wow.
there's no such thing as late around here. You just like popped in at the right time for whatever other crazy thing that we're talking about. So don't feel bad.
That's
And,
really cool. What do you remember? Was it like a Larry Graham special Fender painted white?
I
Completely?
was just staring at the white 360, just going, how does that happen,
happen?
man? Because mine's red, but obviously Redbone painted it red, so
Yeah.
I'm like, what gave me the idea to paint it white?
Wow.
Uh,
Yeah, I'm so impressed you have a Redbone 360 cap.
And then I have another one that's just covered in really crappy carpet,
Yeah.
but the Redbone one, you know. And you're making records in the studio, what do you pull out? You pull out the Redbone one. Then people
Absolutely.
go, who's Redbone? You know, then you go through that whole thing, but
I remember doing a session at a studio where I forget his name. Engineer's name was Clark something or other, and he had bought a bunch of stuff from old Memphis studios, and he's like, and this microphone, Elvis has used this microphone, and I'm like, we're recording me with that microphone today. You just get psyched.
yeah,
right?
I mean, it's inspiration, man.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
It really is. I mean, it's, you know, when you're making a record, you try to make people forget about, I'm making a record, or I really have to get this perfect. You just want people to do their thing. I mean,
Right.
comfort zone.
Yeah, yeah.
So there's so many.
So you bring in the limoncello.
Well, you know, a long time ago, maybe, but not now. Now it's no booze. But, you know, it's a simple thing. Like when Chris Cornell was at my studio, I had asked him to play something, a solo, and he goes, oh, Kim will be down here in 2 days, whatever, let him do it. And so I had this down electro convertible that I tuned to the Rain song, Open G or whatever it is, and I put on the Rain song, and I actually learned it on YouTube really quick, so I can kind of stomach my way through it. And I set the guitar in the corner. My friend June mic'd it up and got a sound. We dialed it in. It's ready to go. And then Chris is such a great player. He came in and he's like, "What is this?" I'm like, "Oh, it's just some whatever." And then
You're manipulating.
yeah, it's what's the real word for it? Not really. Yeah, it's psychological. But you put on the song, and all of a sudden they're playing a solo to it, you know, and they're inspired because of.
Well, now he
This is-
wants to do it.
Yeah, and just the fact that there's a different tuning makes you think outside the box, and you come up
Yeah.
with something different as opposed to, you know,
Yeah.
the one finger guitar player.
My one Chris Cornell story was both of our daughters were in the same production of Annie once, and I just knew it because on the final performance, you know, we're waiting outside ready to go in, and I look over and there's Chris, and I'm like, ah, damn, that's Chris Cornell. And right at that time, he looks at me, and you can see like, oh yeah, you know who I am, and I'm just like, and you could just see the relief in his eyes, like, oh, cool, bro, like you're not gonna make a fuss, great, yep, I see you, and it was just, that was it.
I mean,
That's
he
my
was-
Chris
he was
Cornell story.
So great, man. What a nice dude. But
So what did you work on with him?
I worked on King Animal,
Oh, dude.
and they'd send it to me to listen to, and they were, you know, when you sometimes you make a record, you're so deep into it, you don't really know if you're done or what you need to finish.
Or whether you're in phase.
It was nice to have an outside ear, I guess. So I listened to everything, made some comments. We worked together a couple weeks, and then the guys came down and we mixed it, and it was fun. I made Kim play PV VTMs. And
Wow, yeah.
back like the old school.
Yeah.
But it's such a great guitar. They're both great guitar players, and Ben, the way he bends bass, I've never heard a bass player like that before. And of course, Matt Cameron's a genius. So it's quite a good combination of
Where were you working? Where'd you do that?
my place. Yeah.
Oh, really? So you had his drums set up?
No, Adam Casper produced it, and they did it up in Seattle.
Oh, okay.
But then at some point, I mixed a track, and then then they came down. We tidied up a bunch of stuff and mixed it. That was it.
Oh, that's awesome. That's too cool, man.
You do a fair amount of work outside of your own little environment there.
I mean, I love my place because it's one of those things where you're like, hey, I need some of this. Okay, I can just go over there and get that. But there is a benefit to working elsewhere, other than the obvious stuff where you have a lot of staff and good maintenance and access to different rooms and stuff. But the best part of working my place is I can always reach for something, but the best part of working elsewhere is that you don't always reach for the same thing.
You know, I have a question for you, because your studio is interesting in that, you know, there's the big tracking room, but there's not a lot of ISO stuff. So
Yeah.
I would think that, I mean,
That's
there's
what I hate
pluses and
about it.
minuses. Like, you probably sometimes you hate it, but probably sometimes like, well, we have to do creative things to make this happen because that's what we're working with.
If they don't track live, I mean, I make everybody track live, but a lot of times the guitars and bass are running through speaker simulators.
Yeah.
Which is why I was excited about the IR, because it actually, I always make everybody use their amp. They're like, I'll just plug me into the whatever. I'm like, no. We're going to plug your amp into this.
And
It's
you're
an
going to
8
play
ohm
through
load.
this Palmer.
Yeah. Well, you know, the Palmer has worked for me in the past, but but playing the Palmer and then playing the IR actually has another level of feel to it.
Right.
Which even the Palmer has a better feel than the plug-in.
Right.
So I always make everybody play through their rig, even though there is no cabinet blasting in the room. And then once the drums are done, I set everybody up because I like the fact that everybody's involved. So cut a guitar, maybe double it, put the bass on the song, talk to the singer, hey, what song do you want to sing first? Okay, you know, and then hit the vocal. That way everybody's involved and people are listening and building. And I don't finish the song. That's just too far past for me. I'm like, well, let's get 2 or 3 guitar tracks and bass on it and then put the vocals on it. That gives the guitar players a break, gives the bass player a break, puts the singer, the singer doesn't freak out like, oh my God, all the songs are done. I've got to sing 14 songs in 3 days. So, and it keeps life interesting because you can keep building that way. And that's, so, and it's also like, you know, so you're mixing, set up a drum kit. Here you go, who cares?
And it really depends if they're playing in the room with their gear or not. If you want that feel of the player interacting with their gear when you're recording, that's one thing. But if they're going to be in the control room, running a cable out to the amp that's cranked and then mic, but they're listening to it in the monitor in the control room, there isn't a whole lot of differentiation between that and running the amp into a reactive load and an IR and hearing it through the monitors. It's almost the same thing.
I mean, sometimes I will put an amp speaker in the control room too, just because that feedback is natural.
Yeah, that's true.
You know, and have that. There is a phasiness that happens with stuff being picked up through the guitar pickup. You know, so those things are interesting to me. I mean, it's the microphone hanging down over the cabinet,
right,
as opposed to aiming at the speaker, picking it up on the side. That's technically phasy, right?
But hey, worked good enough for live gigs.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes it works in the studio too. Like,
I like that sound.
I don't need a mic stand. Here we go. Just wrap this poor mic cable around this handle a couple times, and we're done.
Yeah. Sometimes that sounds really cool.
Yeah, I mean, it's inspirational, man. When stuff's clinical, you know. I mean, the one thing I learned about Sound City is no one was afraid to perform in Sound City because it felt like a rehearsal room. And then you'd walk into some of the high dollar studios and you set your drink down on a counter and somebody's there like, oh my God.
See, I was going to ask if, you know, some of the higher dollar sessions that you've done where you have everything at your disposal, if you get everything set up and you're kind of like, it just feels like it's too far away from the garage. It's too far away from the rehearsal space. It's too far away from the stage. It's just...
Well, that's when you use different spaces, though. You know, I mean, you go into an obvious drum room that's built like this most incredible cathedral,
Yeah.
and you put the drums in the back closet or in the echo chamber.
Yeah.
And that you open the echo chamber door and you feed that in the drummer's headphones because they're reacting to the sound that's happening in their headphones. That's the one common thing that, like, I remember working Electric Lady. And this is
Oh, you've worked there?
yeah, so I cut Pinkerton at Electric Lady, and it like kind of the room changed all the time, and the band didn't want to use headphones, so we just used wedges. I'm like, why not? Here's your headphone mixer. You can dial whatever you want, pump whatever you want through that wedge, but the wedge is in the room, so you get all this leakage that's happening, but the band could play. But the room felt disconnected. So Eddie Martinez. Do you remember Eddie Martinez played with Robert
Guitar player.
Palmer? Yeah, great guitar
Yeah,
player.
yeah.
And he was good friends with Jason Casara. And we went over to Ed's house one day, and I asked him about, you know, his guitar sounds. And he's like, I used to use these LPB ones.
Yeah,
And
baby.
you talk about it the other day, right? Right? So he goes, but I rack mounted it because it was way better than having it coming out of your guitar.
Rack mounted an LP one. Basically, two capacitors, a resistor, a pot, and a transistor.
And he had them in a rack, and it was in his rack, you know, whatever. His guitar sound was phenomenal. So anyway,
They probably had just enough room for a 9-volt battery in there too. All that.
he goes, I got a bunch of them in a box over here. You can just have them. And some of them were broken, some weren't. But I ended up, you know, taking the two Neumann M49s that I was using in the room and ran it through two LPB ones, and it made the whole drum sound. It made the whole sound of the band come alive because the
That's
band was playing
funny.
a lot.
That's funny.
Well, I forget which record that I heard they did this on, but obviously massive drum room kind of thing, and then they mic'd the whole damn thing up and then sent it basically through a PA in the room.
Oh, I do it all the time.
Oh, okay. So that's
Yeah,
not
I mean,
that's
kick,
just
snare,
a
and
standard
toms
thing?
usually. Well, if you're in a massive room and you push up a room mic or a pair of room mics, and the drum sound is not very big because it's very roomy.
Yeah.
But if you make the kick, snare, and the toms come out of a PA, then the room is more drummy, like a live show. So
Yeah, makes sense.
I did it on Tool. I've done it on quite a few records actually.
I set an amp up in the hallway at El Dorado one time, and let me elaborate. The hallway outside the actual recording studio, El Dorado recording studio, in the building that it was in at the time, long narrow hallway with linoleum on the floors,
Oh,
like
yeah.
straight back from 1950.
Oh yeah.
So it
Where'd
was
the mic go?
the other end of the hallway.
Kind of like at sort of head height, or kind of because I've done that kind of thing, and I'll like stick it in the corner. So
I don't
stuff's
remember.
all-
I just remember that the amp was at one end and the mic was at the other end, probably
Sometimes
about
that's
this high
amazing
off
reverb.
the floor.
Yeah.
It was the coolest thing. Well, but
So
you'd
what
have
do
to
you
be
use?
you'd have to be like a Dave Jordan to know what to even do with a contraption like that.
You can go with it.
You go with it.
That's what I'm saying.
So do you just nuke the hell out of like your
you
room
know,
mics?
Sometimes
smash
yes,
them?
sometimes no. I mean, to me, it's like sometimes you can, but sometimes you don't need it. Like
Yeah.
you walk around a room where you were doing it the other day, where you're like, oh, right here, it sounds great in this room, you know. And that's kind of what we do on these workshops that we teach sometimes too. We're like, you know, people just put a mic up in front of where should the drums go? Over there. Okay, cool.
And
But
how-
if you actually hit the kick drum in different spots of the room or hit the snare, there is a spot where you're just gonna go, whoa, the low end is awesome right here.
Yeah.
So at least I know I can use a mic in this area to pick up low end, or maybe I set the kit up here. But, you know, these acoustics, nobody uses ears anymore. They just put it on there and they go, okay, just
Or they go.
trigger with it later.
We're gonna use samples anyway.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. Which,
Yeah.
and you might. Sometimes samples are great, but the whole idea about getting the sound at the source correct. I did a record with Mike Stone, who did Queen, first 6 Queen records. News of the World was his first 24 track.
Really?
Yeah, just insane. And we moved every part of the drum kit for 2 weeks. Whether it was where in the room, which drum, which mic, which head, which tuning, everything about every aspect you could possibly, or you could have thrown something up and just EQ the shit out of it. Not him. He was so meticulous about making the source correct and pairing the right mic. And in the end, it was the most ungodly drum sound I've ever heard.
Oh, okay. So it actually justified the means.
Totally.
Sometimes I wonder if it's just like we have a big budget and I can do whatever I want, so let's fuck around like this for a week. But it actually was
Sometimes
justified. Huh?
you don't know how far you can go until you've gone there. That's a Roy
And then the
Thomas
accountant comes and says, well, this is the reason you can't pay your rent this month.
This is why there's only 3 days left for the singer to sing the whole album.
Yeah. Pull up Bear Godfish's comment about the phase weirdness on a Palmer. Yeah. Okay. So I can actually speak to that a little bit. The Palmer you're talking about, the Palmer load box. There was 2 versions of it.
Yeah, the 03 and
The
05 maybe.
Yeah, there was one that had.
There
There
a
was,
good
there was
one
the
and then
earlier
stinky
one that everybody called the original one. They came out with one, and then a while later they came out with a supposed improvement
It's
that
never an improvement.
had more functions on it
Yeah.
and stuff like that. And
Yeah.
that was the first one I got,
Oh, okay.
and I used that, and I liked that for a while, and then they reissued the original one because everybody was making so much noise about the original one is so much more reactive and so much better and blah 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 blah. So I got one, and I went, yeah, it's much more alive sounding, it's more reactive, I can tell. And I brought it to rehearsal and rehearsed that day, and then for the next 2 days I had what was like a migraine, a really bad migraine.
Oh.
And then the next time we rehearsed, I used my regular one.
But what do you mean rehearsing?
Rehearsal with my band.
Yeah, but what were you doing with a Palmer? Like,
I had an
how are
amp.
you using it? Yeah.
I had an amp slaved. I was actually using a preamp into a 252 power amp.
Okay.
The power amp slaved into a Palmer, one channel, and then that into another power amp and into a cabinet.
Steve!
Because there were no union reps around to dock me for doing things badly or wrong or against the rules or whatever.
Oh,
And-
man.
From that experiment, I ended up liking that, but it sounded better on the Class A B setting than the Class A setting. But I also had a hot plate, and so I took the hot plate and put it on the other channel of the 252, and I liked that better in the Class A mode. So I had one on each channel, the Palmer on one channel, the hot plate on the other channel, the line outs of those going into a 2150 power amp, and then out to 2 412 cabs.
Okay.
So I was slaving the power amps and driving them hard, going through the reactive lows or the cab lows, whatever, attenuated down into the power amp just for the volume.
Yeah.
So I was slaving a power amp into a power amp.
Right.
And
Well,
then
I'm gonna need a diagram.
I'm way too
I
lazy.
actually have a detailed diagram of that someplace. And then a friend of mine said, hey, they've reissued the original one. You want to check it out? So he sent me one, and I put that in place of the other one and started getting this massive headache. And then when I was experimenting on my own, I was playing through both of them. And then the day that I spent 2 or 3 hours playing with the reissue one, headache again.
Huh.
And then I went back to the other one, no headache. 2 days in a row. So I did it another day,
You
no
weren't
headache.
huffing paint?
I wasn't. inhaling
Crazy high frequencies going on.
model
or something.
cement or anything like that. And I went back to the other Palmer and no headache, and then I went back to the reissue one again, big headache. It was very consistent and repeatable.
Okay.
Wow.
So, speaking to Bear's comment, a reactive load, just by its very nature, is going to introduce some phase shift. Because when you're pushing an amp and when you're pushing a speaker, there is going to be some phase shift in the signal because the speakers aren't perfect, the power amp isn't perfect, you don't want it to be perfect. You're striving for imperfection, a great tonal experience at the expense of perfection. All that's just what happens. So phase shift can be a problem, but in this particular case, the way the original reactive characteristic of the Palmer, and what's really interesting about the Palmer is it wasn't a reactive load, it was a non-reactive resistive load.
Okay.
And then attenuated down to a line signal level and then run through a very low signal level reactive load that was made with small inductors and small capacitors. So it wasn't a reactive load that absorbed a lot of power. It was a very low power, very small
That's interesting.
resistors, capacitors, inductors, just like a big load, but just very small,
Dumbed down.
operating in the low signal realm, but behaving the same way. And there was something about the phase shift and the frequency peaks that thing generated that just gave me a monstrous headache. So, and that could be defined as phase weirdness, but
Well, you're also running it with a speaker cabinet.
See, I've never done that.
There's going to be the direct sound
Right.
and the mic sound,
Right.
so there is going to be a latency.
uh-huh.
So back in the day when you got a tape machine and you recorded a DI in an amp, we used to just put a delay on the DI so you can move it back in time a
Yeah.
little bit to
Yeah,
get
I
it
heard
more in
about that.
phase with the amp.
Yeah.
Nowadays you can sit there and look at it and shuffle it around. But don't go too
interesting.
crazy over there. Just a little tiny one for me, please.
You don't have to drink the whole thing.
That's okay. We'll walk you home.
Oh man, I'm such a lightweight after yesterday.
Yeah, the Palmer. We talked about this on the show before. Palmer's to me, I think, was the first time that it sort of clicked for me that there's a place for anything. I bought a Palmer just because I thought, and it was the first one, just because I heard cool things about it, and I tried to use it and was disappointed because it didn't sound like my mic'd up cabinet or whatever. But I remember I was producing a record and I had this, I need this particular character and this guitar tone in the upper mids kind of thing. And I went, let's try that Palmer thing. And my God, it did the trick. It was like, oh, okay, anything can work. It just depends on the moment in the tune that you're producing.
Well, I eventually ended up returning the original one, and I kept the later one because even though
The one with the more functions you kept?
even though it wasn't as reactive or
Didn't give you a migraine.
as live sounding, it did all of the things that I needed it to do.
There's one that had like a knob that went from brown to
Yeah.
I never saw that one.
That
that's
was-
the one that Satriani bought, and I
think
didn't
that's
like it as much as the other one, but I figured out if you turn the input down, it was amazing.
Huh.
Yeah, that was the one I had, the later one. That was the later one, and it did have that sort of that little character knob. Yeah, so it did have some more it was one of those things where you sort of had to figure out what makes it work best and what is it really good at. Just, like anything,
Yeah.
right?
Yes.
So I'm really curious.
These look different. Like something else happened.
Okay, I
don't
see
know
what's going on. Well, this is for you. This is my guess. This is for you, and this one is for Joe.
Whoever wants it. One is apple.
This is, you had mentioned
Oh yeah, I'll have to try
Apple.
the Apple.
So that's the apple one, and that's grapefruit, and this is these are both.
Were you saying that the grapefruit is supposed to stave off hangovers or something like that? I've never heard of this. How does that work?
Well, we'll about find out.
Drink as much as you want.
Okay, I'm not going to do that because I'm still driving this evening. But cheers again.
And I'm working tomorrow.
Yeah,
Working.
we're all
We're all
working
working
tomorrow.
tomorrow.
I'm probably
Hopefully.
not going to sleep at all tonight. So,
Cheers.
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 This is that
Oh yeah. What is that?
the honeysuckle.
oh,
Yeah, but what is that secret ingredient? I remember this.
That's
bison grass.
bison grass.
That is delicious.
God, that is so
I
good.
need to put that in a thermos.
Oh, this is the one.
You don't put it in a
and an
thermos.
IV going all day.
This is the one that when I started talking about the notes in it, they were cracking up last time.
The
Remember?
what?
So I was like, it's got vetiver and I named and honeysuckle.
Honeysuckle.
And one of you guys was like, I've never heard a grown man say that combination of stuff in my life. Too many Joes in that room. I agree, man. I'm out of here.
Yeah.
You guys got it for the rest of the way.
Yeah. Piss off all he is.
Did you do the Volto record in your room?
No, I mixed it there, but
Oh, you mixed it. Oh, okay.
we cut it live and in the Tool loft,
Oh, all right.
and John was right next to Dan, and Lance played bass, DI. But John's amp and Dan's drums are in the same room, so
Damn.
it was awesome because I mean those guys don't make mistakes. So
Yeah.
John's had a great rig, and then keyboard player came in and played in the control room at some point because it became Jeff Babco, and we'd work during the day, and he was doing some other stuff, working his normal gigs,
Yeah.
and he'd just come in and listen down to the most insane music 1 or 2 times, and just go, okay,
Yeah.
incredible, but
Oh, that's cool.
it was like done in a weekend pretty much,
Wow.
except for the mixing, so
Well, you had to check the phasing.
on everything.
So one of the things about this show that I really love the placeholder that you did for the show. It just cracked me up.
The Holy Grail.
Yeah, yeah.
I hope everybody got, because even Eriko didn't get that was Nico-chan. She's like, is that a little teddy bear? I'm like, no, that's you. That's Nico-chan.
But you didn't. The thing that you left out of it was part 1.
I thought about that.
Oh, good.
And we'll do that in the titling because it just gets too busy when you put, when you're trying to fit stuff in there. And I had a hard enough time fitting in there what I did in the first place.
Well, the reason I
looks-
brought it up is because we're actually going to do 2 shows. We're going to do 2.
You're going to get inside Joe's amplifier.
So there's going to be 2 videos.
Yeah.
That's not related to the show that we're doing. We're going to do 2 videos off of that. There's going to be part 1 and part 2.
Yeah, yeah.
And the part 1 is the video that you've already pretty much put together and wrapped up.
Yeah.
And I think, did you launch it today, or you're going to do it on Monday maybe?
It's up on YouTube, but I need to make a placeholder, like a thumbnail for it, and then we'll put it out tomorrow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we basically documented the whole visit and all the crazy stuff that we did.
Huff and paint. And
Yeah, and then
shooting up.
after that, I'm gonna grab that amp from. Thank you very much. I'm gonna grab the amp from Joe,
Good, thank you.
and we're gonna open it up and have a look inside and see what was going on there, because there was a couple of weird little things.
There's some
And then-
definite DC going on.
Yeah, and then by that time, you're gonna let me know if you want me to go in and do any minimally invasive surgery.
we're going in.
Huh?
We are going.
Oh, we're going in.
Yeah.
I
I
like
just
that.
really want to absorb the fanes
That's right. That's right.
for a couple days because the thing I noticed about them is that it almost separated the strings on the guitar. And I wasn't getting that at all. It just sounded like a bad fuzz box before. So when you jumped the channels and tweaked it a little bit and then played some chords, I can hear the
Piano.
definition. Yeah, exactly. And
There's actually a dip switch in there. It's labeled PT.
Pete
You
Townsend.
just need to go in there and, oh, the Pete Townsend switch just wasn't flipped. then you're in business, right? That's all you do.
I think it's actually the positions are P and DP. And one position is play, and the other position is don't play.
Don't play. Or blocking distortion.
Yeah,
Blockhead
BD.
distortion. That's terrible. John asks, "Where's Annie?" Poor Annie.
She's sitting on the couch at home, I'm sure, and in need of a walk. She's getting old, man. She's 13.
She's such a laid back.
She's the sweetest. I was actually kind of funny. I didn't bring this. I was going to tell this, the end of the story, but Cornell was so cool. My dog Bullet, the previous dog, used to go and sing with him.
Oh,
Did you get any of that on videotape?
I didn't get it on video, but he kept it. He loved it. I was like, oh my God, my dog's ruining his performance right now. And he was so into it because he loved dogs. He loved labs. That he never said a word. When the record comes out, I'm looking through the credits and I see additional vocals, Bullet.
oh.
That's
Which is
sweet.
Even cooler, man. And I was like, I remember just calling him, dude. Because I was, he was like, yeah, let's use it. Keep it in there. It's awesome. And my dog's like howling while he's singing.
That
I'm
is
like,
great. That is so great.
Annie's not very vocal at all, unless there's a coyote in the room. And she's like, yeah. She freaks out.
Now, how often do you allow coyotes to run wild in your studio?
Never.
Oh,
I was
okay.
like, unless there's a coyote in the room. I'm
Well,
like, when
when I
happen?
walk her at night, like the other night after you guys left, I walked her, and I didn't see a coyote until we were leaving after I cleaned the studio, and then I let her in the parking lot, and then she's freaking out.
Oh,
And I'm like,
interesting.
I figured it was a coyote or a cat, but as I shut my gate, a big coyote ran
No
across
kidding.
the street. Yeah.
Huh. Wow.
So she gets excited at coyotes.
Did you work with the band ISIS?
Yes, Aaron Harris was the guy who brought me the Meyer lemons to make the limoncello.
That was such a cool band. We still work with Aaron Turner.
Oh, he had a pit bull.
Yeah, he's like the one of two guys that use the head and the slant and straight cabinets together. That stacks them with the wheels on.
Oh, that's that guy.
the one.
You told me about him.
There's two guys that do that, and I don't know about the other
and
guy.
it's an ingredient that he insists on having.
Yeah.
It's not. Yeah, this is easy to move him around. He's like, no, this is how I get it to sound right.
Yeah, what his was there's
He's decoupling everything.
Yeah, it has to be that way. It sounds right that way, and that's the way you designed it, right? They must have done it for a reason, so that's why I set it up. And then when I took it off, I noticed that was wrong, so I put it back on, and then it was right, and so I always use it.
Wow.
And the other guy that does it was. He didn't say anything about the sound or having perceived any difference running it one way or the other. It's just that's the way it came.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Well,
And-
I mean that's right in line with a lot of what we were talking about the other
What's
day.
really funny about it is
Right.
I did that because I just thought it looked cool, and I spent a lot of time getting those little cups custom molded with the logo in them and the right thickness of plastic so that when you screwed them in, they wouldn't crack and stuff. And then, we measured the wheel centers because the wheels are offset of when you plug the wheels into the bottom of the cabinet, the wheels are offset of the
rubber.
plug.
Yeah.
The plug that goes into the bottom of the cabinet,
Yeah.
so they're offset.
Yeah.
So you have to turn them both inward
Yeah.
and then measure from wheel center to wheel center. And that's the dimension between the center of the caster cups. And I've gone after a couple of cabinet makers with baseball bats. It's like, what the hell are you doing with my caster cups? You put them in the wrong place. Well, they're just caster cups. They're specified at this distance for a reason. Well, it doesn't say that on the drawing. Yeah, it shows right there. There's the dimension from the caster cup center to caster cup center. They have to be that way. Well, what are you being so anal for? And then
That's the brown M&Ms.
I put the
It's
cabinet
inches.
together with the wheels on it and set it up, and two of the wheels are like halfway up the side of one of the caster cups, so the whole thing is
it's
tipped.
all
And I said,
right.
"Do you see it
I'm
yet?"
doing Stonehenge tonight.
Exactly. I'm going, "Do you see it yet?" And they're like, "Really? Is it?" Nobody's going to do that anyway. And I said, "It doesn't matter if nobody ever does it. That's the way it's designed. That's the way it's on the
fired.
drawing. That's the way you're going to do it if you want to get paid." Oh, the paid part, right, okay. So they go back and then they do it right.
What's the
Then
line?
we get
What's
it.
the Nigel line?
Do the photo session, right? To get, it's got to be perfect, because when we do the photograph, we're going to be doing right and left angles
yeah.
and all that stuff. It's got to be perfect. There was so much work went into getting those caster cups just in the right position, basically for
makes
some
sense.
photographs. And so, do I appreciate the two guys that appreciate that? Absolutely.
Yeah.
All right.
But well, what is it? As confused as Nigel.
Confused as Nigel, all you. It all comes back to Spinal Tap, doesn't it?
Yeah,
I mean,
it
in
sure
the end.
does.
I can't believe that you send that out and then they're not going to follow what you actually
Yeah,
sent
I mean,
them. That's scary.
Welcome to the
That's
world.
frightening, man.
Pay attention to detail. What? Really?
Yeah. Jay-Z saying you made an amp head. You created an amplifier.
Yes.
Would you like to talk about it?
I'll just say that if I can build an amp, anybody can build an amp. Just keep one hand in your pocket while you're digging around with the other hand, because you can die.
Oh, did you get banged a couple of times?
No, I was pretty lucky actually.
I rebuilt an entire Plexi, like a 69 spec amp. Because like the turret board cracked, and then the chassis cracked and bent. It's like I had to transfer everything, so I had to take everything apart. And I had no idea what I was doing, but I can solder. So I just
what I
took
figured.
pictures and like, okay, man,
Yeah.
let's go in and get it done.
I mean, I just did it because I wanted to learn more about the insides. There's no
Yeah.
way I could ever design it or tweak it or do any of the, the things you guys do. But I could put it together and get sound to come out of it and at least learn,
Okay, Brendan, let's not get too sensitive. No, Joe's not insulting me. Of course, he's not making a differentiation between assembling an amp and
designing an amp.
conceiving something from scratch. Those
Oh,
are
yeah,
two
sorry.
different sort of things.
No, I didn't mean it that way.
No,
I just
nobody
meant like
did.
if somebody else wanted to build an amp, because I build guitar pedals too, because I just feel like I could try to put something together. And
Sure.
then we talked about like making stuff unique, and then if you paint it a certain way and go, dude, check
It's kind of
out
like
the-
paint by numbers. You get
Yeah.
a kit and it's
Yeah,
like, all
and it
right.
just
you-
tells you
can,
what to do.
You can build a Harley from parts.
Totally,
You can
yeah,
build a 56 Chev from parts.
and not know jack about what you just built. which
Or
is
the,
like
well, the
me.
knowledge behind it is non-existent in my brain.
Yeah,
I
me
mean,
too.
but if
But you
somebody-
do know something about that speakers should be in phase.
I was
do.
gonna say, I was gonna work that one in too. Yeah.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just education in the end.
Yeah,
Read books.
And boredom.
It's that too.
I haven't done
yeah.
this yet.
Well,
Let's
how do
build
you
an
how do you
amplifier.
communicate with somebody? That's the one thing too. Like if I, like you play guitar, and when you did certain things the other day, it made sense to me because you could say, when I do this, I get this, and I'm like, oh, okay. But if I didn't play guitar, I would not understand what you're talking about. Or how you're in a studio and you're trying to coach a singer. Well, how do you know how to do that unless you try to sing or know what happens to your throat while you're singing, or I try to educate myself in as much stuff as possible. And when I feel like, okay, somebody's plugging into something and they feel like their amp isn't giving them what they need, maybe I could, like what you plugged in my own amp that I thought was crap, and you just jumped to channels and it was God. I was like, huh. You know what I mean? That knowledge of you playing that amp and knowing how to set it and everything, all your
Yeah.
years of experience, I'll never have that. But
But
I
now
could,
you have it though,
well, I do.
because you
but
also know how to run a Marshall, and you didn't know how to do that at one point. And then that's how these things work.
Yeah, that's
right?
why you do it this way, or this is what.
But he was
Yeah.
just asking you questions about 6550s the other day too, and stuff like that. Like I mean, I'm never going to know what a primary transformer is or what it does or any of that stuff. But I do know that I could tap the negative feedback off of 4, 8, or 16.
Right.
And by doing it and soldering it and listening to it, I can tell you what the difference in sound is.
Right, exactly.
But I, by no means, can tell you why.
But the funny thing is when we were going through that, when we got to the point where I go, okay, we're going to play through Joe's amp now, and what we're going to probably experience is, and then in my mind, somebody in there pulled the emergency brake.
You hear that? There's a coyote out there.
Oh, that's what I thought too.
Yeah, well, there's a
Coyote time.
yeah.
You did. You were like, I have an idea what's going to happen, but I'm not going to talk about it right now.
I started to say, what's going to happen, and then I just instinctively stopped and thought, no, I'm not going to let the cat out of the bag. I want to be surprised too, like those guys. So I'm speculating what might happen, but I don't know. I haven't opened the amp yet. I
have a
haven't
question
looked
for
at
you,
it
though.
inside. I haven't tested anything. I haven't checked the capacitor. I haven't done anything. I'm just thinking, it's just very possible. I better not say anything because I don't want to color anybody's opinion.
But my question is, were you realizing at that moment, wait a minute, I owned this amp.
It's exactly what I
And
was
I
thinking.
had to figure out how to work it.
That's
and I
exactly-
remember how to do that now. Okay.
But I don't want to spill beans yet.
Okay.
Because
that's what I thought.
I could, first of all, I didn't want to sound arrogant. I didn't want to make an ass of myself.
Yeah.
I didn't want to embarrass anybody.
And you didn't want to put it in anybody's head.
And I didn't want to especially didn't want to put it into anybody's head.
Yeah.
So I thought, let's all be pleasantly
Surprised
surprised,
together, yeah.
Together. And
Yes.
so, and that's when I went, oh, that's right, Joe. Y cable, you got to have a Y cable. He goes, oh yeah, I got Y cables all over the place. So we plugged it all in, and then when I turned it on, of course, I turned the master volume up because not this is what you should do, dude. It's just that's what I automatically do on that amp. That thing is a problem. It needs to be out of the way.
Mm-hmm.
And we got a power station. That's what that's for. So we don't have to worry about that. And then when I played the first chord and you guys went, I just went, I'm so glad I kept my mouth shut. It was great because that
It was
the
funny
reaction.
because we're going, where's this horrible amp
Yeah.
I've been hearing about
Well,
for 3 hours?
I'm going to say this too, not just, but you also played to the amp,
Well, yeah, there's that.
which is amazing. Like the one thing I will say, recording multiple players is a lot of times an amp. That's not a forgiving amp. You have to
No.
play to it, and you're a good guitar player, and you had the sound, and you know how to play these things. So you played how the amp should be played, not necessarily just setting it up the same way, but you played the parts that should come out of that amp.
Yeah.
And sometimes you get, players that come in and they play a certain style, and an amp like that would just, make the bad parts of the playing stick out. And that's the time when you need to figure out, I need an amp that's a little more forgiving, maybe a little more distorted or
I think there's
compressed.
a couple of things with that kind of deal. Is Steve, even though he started with that amp back there, that Fender Concert, it's funny, when we were playing that thing, we realized, you know what? That's a little high watty. That particular Fender. And then he graduated to the high watt world, and Steve, Fryette VHT has always gotten accused of kind of being what people will talk about with high watts, just this unforgiving kind of thing. But he's been in that land his whole life.
Some of your amps, though, man, they work in every genre.
I agree.
And not just because we're here too, but I honestly have a rack of rack gear, and I always say, oh man, I gotta plug the ADA in, and I gotta plug the Mesa Studio preamp in, and I gotta do this. And the only thing I've ever plugged them into is effects returns of amps, and every
Right.
time it sounds like crap. And then we talked one day, and you're like, you should try one of my power sections, and I got the 292, and I was like, what the hell?
What the fuck
Where's
just
this
happened?
thing been my whole life? And then literally after that, everybody, I was like, you should check this out because you're using, rack gear, and it'll make your rack gear usable. So that in general, like you've opened up another 20 space rack of sound with that, just the power amp. So whatever you're doing
That's cool.
to the power section, And we've used, pit bulls, we've used deliverances, we've used pretty much everything. And
What's
it
funny
goes
about
back
the
and
power
forth.
amps is what my initial concept was is that it should be not hi-fi, because I already understood that playing guitar into hi-fi gear wasn't going to be a life-changing experience. But what I did feel was that in that particular environment, pushing the power amp to its max wasn't going to be the goal for that piece of equipment.
No.
It just needed to sound like the right kind of power amp to be in a rig like that, and that everybody wasn't going to want it to sound exactly the same. So presence control, no brainer, we're going to put a presence control in there. And then once I did that, and I'd already been experimenting with damping and controls and seeing how other people were kind of approaching that sort of concept, and thinking, yeah, but no, that's not really exactly it. What I think is going to make players react one way or another is not how much bass response it has, but how the bass response behaves given a particular cabinet, and that interactive behavior could be adjustable so that it's more for the people that want more feel and it's less for the people that want it tighter. And that's
Yeah.
where the depth control came from. So I put those two controls on there. The power amp came out, it took off, and Randy Smith comes up to me and he goes, because I'd done a lot of warranty repair work for him, and I'd done a couple of prototype things or some special projects for some guitar players, and he's like, so I hear you're going to get into the amp business. I said, no effing way, I'm not going to subject myself to that. I don't want to be miserable the rest of my life.
Lies.
I honestly didn't think that I had it in me to start an amp company, and I just told him that that's just going to be way over my head. So when the 2150 came out and started like taking away his sales, he goes,
Do you take the piss?
yeah, you're the guy that wasn't going to start an amp company. I swear to God, I was.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
he says, not only did you start an amp company, but all of our customers said that they didn't want any kind of controls on the front panel. And you come along and you put variable controls on the front. And like, now, what are we going to do?
Interesting.
And I just said, just seemed to make sense to me. Well, the power amp thing is so cyclical. Like musical styles is cyclical, but power amps and rack gear is really, it comes and goes. The emphasis on bigger powered power amps and smaller powered power amps come and go. But like, for example, Steve Vai's starting to use the 292s again.
Yeah.
He started touring with him. He's like, man, these are great sounding power amps. And like, well, you were using them 10, 12 years ago. He goes, was that the same thing? And I go, yeah, exactly the same power.
thing.
And you told me that you know a guy that's got
Yeah, Chris has got one of them.
one of the power amps that they bought from him. And he's just like,
yeah, it's one of his
I
prized
thought
possessions.
those seemed
He
really
tours with that
familiar.
thing too.
Yeah.
He ships his whole damn rack over to Europe when he's on. Yeah.
So that was hilarious. So that's just I just
But
keep seeing that and going.
I always to me the rack stuff. We've talked about how odd it is when people will talk about this idea of just like take a Marshall power section and turn it into a rack power amp, and you're going, wait a minute, no, because that's not like a rack power amp is almost like the last stop in a portable guitar studio, right?
Yeah.
It's not just, crank this part up and let's brown out the sound down here. It's like, no, because the whole thing in a guitar rack was you're reproducing like studio level effects and shit like that. Like, it's not, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, with
you had to
after 4 or 5
reverbs
rack
and
spaces
delays
of
and-
all these things in the signal path, the dynamics start to suffer, the noise floor starts
yeah,
to
it's
suffer.
it's
and-
still got to feel and sound like a guitar
Right,
amp,
and part
but you're
of-
reproducing all this
right.
stuff that
And part of what the power amp was trying to do in that environment was restore some of that lost dynamic
is
feel.
that what it was?
Yeah,
Okay,
absolutely.
very interesting.
Because that's the last thing that plugs into your speaker cabinet.
Uh-huh.
If you had a solid state power amp,
you didn't get that interactive behavior.
And I think you kind of had the advantage when you showed up on the scene with your power amps. It's like, okay, you guys have had, I don't know, 3, 4, 5 years of listening to this shit through solid state power amps. Now give this a gander.
Well,
you know?
I learned something
right?
out of that, because the first time that I brought a 2150 down to a shop that was a retail shop and a place where you went to get rack systems built, and a place that you went to store your gear, and a place that you got cartage done where your gear would be transported to a session or wherever.
Walmart?
This was it
Guitar
was
Mart.
Broward. It was Andy Brower's shop. There was Lukather's rack was in there, and he had the H&H V800 in there.
That's what everybody was using,
and
right?
that's what everybody's using, because Eddie was using them. And so I walk in there and I go, oh, so you got a V800. Okay, great. I hadn't heard a V800 personally in a rack system.
Okay.
So I listened to it and I went, yeah, that sounds really good. Okay, well, let's just dive in. And so we set it up so that we could A/B switch them. And it was just like the other day, I just went, better keep your mouth shut so you don't step on your own,
I know you well enough to know that you probably slipped into not salesman mode, but let's learn.
Yeah.
Let's just see.
Yeah. Well, I didn't want
Whoa.
to make an ass out of myself,
Yeah.
so I just kept shut. And then when they switched to the 2150, and then I looked at the expression on everybody's face, I just went, even I wouldn't have anticipated that reaction,
Wow.
because we all did the same thing at the same time. Was whoa, that was just it, just that understated, whoa, what just happened here?
Dude.
And at the exact same moment, okay, so this is at the exact same moment, I knew that I was going to start getting, how did that happen? That was what the question was going to come next. How is that kicking that thing's ass? That's 800 watts a channel. Or 400 watts a channel, a V800. 400 watts a channel, that's 100 watts a channel. How is that kicking
Like,
that
all right,
ass?
Fred, we want answers.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
And man, my brain was working so fast, and I was like, okay, first of all, we're using 16 ohm cabs. So let's get out a calculator, or let's just look at the manual, because in the manual or on the back of the amp, it's going to say 400 watts per channel into 4 ohms. Okay. And then, as with all solid state power amplifiers, as the impedance goes up, the power rating goes down. So at 16 ohms, it's 400 watts at 4 ohms, 200 watts at 8 ohms, 120 watts at 16 ohms. All right, so all I have to do is account for 20 watts, not 200, 250. And so I said the other part of that is that the tube amplifier interacts with the speaker more, and that's what makes it sound louder and more alive, even if they're the same audible volume. If you could put a dB meter in front of them both, and
Right.
they'd both be at 100 dB,
Right.
but the 2150 sounds louder because it's like landing on you, it's going through you. It's not just
Oh, it
staying
does,
parked
man.
way back here in the distance.
I mean, I plugged in the effects returns and power amp inputs, and nothing sounds like plugging into a 292.
So have you played through an MP1 recently?
Oh yeah.
What's it sound like these days?
Fucking awesome.
Really?
Yeah.
You put it through the right power amp and it's awesome?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. I mean, I literally got re-inspired by the 292 to buy like a Marshall preamp.
Which one
And
did you get?
I got the tube one, the 9001,
Oh,
I guess
okay.
it's called.
Uh-huh.
I got my studio preamp up and running again. I got the ADA MP1 going. It's a whole rack of rack gear now.
Were you the one that was saying that you got a formula preamp?
No, my buddy did. Yeah, and I never heard one before. I never even heard of one before. But I always try on every record, because you're like, oh, we're playing through the same amp again, or this is, try this. And sometimes there's a handful of amps that work for the sound of a band, But then you come across something you need. Okay, maybe this will be inspirational. This thing, and then I always try to put it into effects return of some head, and it's not even worth using it because the noise is so crazy. And it just doesn't feel good. But I plug it into 292, and I'm just like, holy God, you just made 20 more rack units now usable. So.
Do you ever
That's
find
cool.
that? Do you ever find that sometimes you just need to plug into something that's different and way off the path that you're on? Just
Yeah.
even if it doesn't work, it just kind of gives you a reset, kind of
It
clean,
generates creativity.
a fresh perspective.
Yeah, because
Even if it's wrong, it's puts you on another path.
yeah, I mean there's so many examples of that. It's I mean I can't even start. But in the end, what you really want to do is and this will come back to it's going to come back to Soundgarden and come back to building your own stuff. Chris at one point said, "Hey, I'm looking for this kind of sound in this section," and so I could have pulled out a Boss DS1, but instead I built a BYOC pedal of some sort, and I was like, well, I painted it some psychedelic, trippy mushroom colors, and I'm like, let's try this thing. He goes, what's that, dude? And then I'm like, oh, it's just something I put together.
It's DS1 different housing.
It might have been. I was making Ampeg scramblers when you couldn't buy an Ampeg scrambler, and I would tack a cactus photo on the front, and get a flamethrower and light them on fire so it just looked cool. People are like, what is that?
That's a business model right there.
It separates you from and what happens? You're on the road and you're like, dude, what was that pedal again? Can I go to Guitar Center and get it? No, you have to come back here to get it. It kind of gives you that one up. But would you want to plug into, a DS1, or would you want to plug into an amp that says "blow my head off"?
Right.
So.
Steve, we got a technical question for you.
Well, good, because I'm just still barely in the realm of being able to answer one.
And Ziegler asked if you wanted to check out his 68, I think he said a super bass. If you wanted to do a bench.
John, I would love to do that.
Yeah,
We're such a
68
sucker
super
for
bass.
that shit.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Do output transformers ever randomly fail? I have a seriatone with a short on the output transformer primary, but I always used it with the PS2 on the forum setting. Randomly fail. Okay, why an output transformer would fail? In really technical terms, the way they're built, if the insulation is not sufficient to protect the different layers from arcing over onto other layers, that could cause a transformer to be failure prone. So you have to be able to know what the failure modes of a transformer design would be to protect against them. Otherwise, if you're trying to make it within a certain budget, of course you're going to take shortcuts and hope for the best. So transformer insulation, the wire insulation, is critical. Transformers can be wound with windings where you put layers of PVC tape between certain groups of windings. Because when you build an output transformer or a power transformer, you're winding a layer of winds, and then another part of the transformer, out of the primary to the secondary, will be wound on top of that. That's a different performing part of that transformer, but they're on top of each other. So you're going to insulate one layer from another layer because there's a big voltage differential between layers. So you're going to do that a few times. But also, if the varnish on the copper wire in the transformers is too thin, or if it isn't properly sealed after it's completed, and what I mean by that is normally you would pot the transformer in varnish after it's completed to help seal it and keep the windings from vibrating and rubbing, which can rub off the insulation of the windings. All of that kind of stuff can cause a transformer to fail. So that's intrinsic in the design, and that has to be incorporated into the design up front to make sure that you're trying to prevent that from happening. On top of that, the final assembly, which is once you make a coil, then you have to have the PVC coated colored wires coming out to connect to the primary and the secondary and various things like that. If those aren't carefully attached, once the whole thing is put together and somebody yanks on a wire or another wire, they could break that before the transformer is entirely sealed. So that can fail. It cannot necessarily be a short, but it could be an open circuit. And we see that from time to time where all of a sudden the transformer just stops working. It doesn't blow any fuses. It doesn't smell, doesn't smoke. It doesn't smell hot or get weird. It just stops working. And I've opened up transformers and seen the wire just broke off because it wasn't properly handled in assembly in the first place. There's that. Then there's application where you put too much voltage or too much current through it so that in your particular design you haven't properly designed it so you're running the transformer beyond its safe operating zone, and that could cause it to just randomly fail. So there's all these different kinds of failure modes. Our transformers, for example, are wound using double insulated wire. I didn't select double insulated wire because I thought it was better or safer or more reliable. I didn't know anything about it at the time. We just started having transformers fail because the insulation was cracking. And once the little varnish coating on the copper wire, that would crack, and if the varnish cracked on two different windings at about the same place, that would leave a little path for it to arc if you really pounded on the output transformer.
Yeah.
Or on the power transformer if it got a certain heat. Why did it start cracking? We go to the transformer supplier. We're experiencing failures. What's going on here? Oh, well, the Los Angeles Air Quality Management District has now decreed that all varnish used in production has to be water-based because the solvent-based varnishes are now outlawed.
Anti-lacquer
Right.
Yeah.
Same thing with guitars. So we switched to water-based varnish, and it is a little bit more brittle. Okay, what are we going to do about that? Well, we can try switching to double insulated wire, which is two coats of varnish on the copper wire that it doesn't cure as quickly.
Oh.
So if it cures too quickly, it would crack.
Yeah.
Just like on checking on a guitar finish.
Yeah.
So I got a whole education in that. We switched to double insulated water-based varnish on the wires, and that stopped the transformers from failing for that reason. And so we just find all kinds of reasons for things to just start giving up. And then there's like I said, the difference between paper layers of insulation between groups of layers and PVC insulation. PVC generally is a better insulator technically, but paper is stiffer and it will cause the windings to line up more linearly on a row, where with PVC it's more flexible, so the windings can tend to sort of sag into each other rather than lay on top of each other because they're not as stiff as paper insulation.
Yeah.
That when you use paper insulation, it tends to keep all the windings lined up more nicely. And in some cases, that can improve the audio performance. It isn't necessary always. You can usually compensate.
Is it like amp efficiency?
Well,
like that's
actually,
good in some applications.
That PVC
can
actually act like a capacitor.
Like what's the deal with scatter winding?
Well, scatter winding is just saying we don't want to spend any more money on the labor time that it takes.
But I thought that was desirable for some people. Like that's the tone.
That's the reason every Marshall amp sounds different than every other Marshall amp. Because scatter winding is just saying we'll take our chances. We're going to sell 1,000 amps and 5 of them or 10 of them are going to break, and that we're just going to pay the warranty. But it's going to ultimately save us money over the more precision wind methods that.
And you clowns can just run the racks and try and find a good one.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah,
it's up
and
to
you'll
you.
Same
Yeah.
thing.
because
Yeah.
all that
500K.
sort of random lineup of
Totally.
windings on the primary and the secondary side, they'll interact differently, and they'll make transformers that some of them sound more sparkly, some of them sound duller and have better bass, some of them have the bass isn't so good, some of them have a capacitance in between the primary and secondary that causes a high frequency oscillation that makes it sound busy and spitty. All that stuff can happen in scatter winding. So, and plus, if they don't use good quality wiring, wire insulation varnish on the wire, it will break down easily, more easily, especially when you use it with an attenuator. And if anybody knows anything about using attenuators in the 70s, when the Schultz Power Soak came out,
I was so.
I have one.
all of a sudden,
Of course you do.
output transformers started blowing. And then it became, okay, that Schultz thing is a piece of crap. It's causing transformers to blow.
Right, yeah,
What
right,
was
yeah.
really happening,
It's corrupt.
what was really happening is at the same time that the Schultz Power Soak came out, Marshall had started to switch to scatter winding on their output transformers.
Of course. Save a nickel.
Save a nickel. So Marshall's fix for the scatter winding problem when used with attenuators is this. When you bought an output transformer from Marshall to replace in one that had blown, it had this big red tag on it that said, this transformer is not warranted against defects caused by amplifier
way.
attenuators.
No shorts.
Don't even try it. It's going to break, and we're going to tell you to piss off. So,
insane.
Wow.
and I can totally relate to that because at the time that the 2150 came out, after the very first revision, we came out with one that had more dynamic range and some improvements in the power supply so that it had a bigger, more responsive dynamic range. At the same time that revision 2 model came out, they started blowing power tubes. And we're like going, what the hell is going on here? They test out fine. We're like beating the crap out of them. We're doing everything, just retesting tubes over and over again to make sure that there's nothing in the design and we're going, everything's fine. We send a couple of power amps to some guys that are getting ready to go tour, and like 3 days later they're coming back. This thing's blowing fuses right and left. We open it up and there's the fuses are completely exploded, and what the hell's going on?
Guys.
At the same time that model came out, Marshall came out with the stereo-enabled 412 cab that had the little slide switch on the
That's
back.
the first
Yeah.
thing you take out of that cabinet.
That slide switch,
And it's like a 1 cent part.
yeah, well, in a Marshall cabinet, there's that center post, right?
Yeah.
And the back cover is pressed up against that center post. Okay, you plug that cabinet into this newfangled high-powered power amp that's got all this low-end response characteristic. Now that back cover is banging against that sound post
Right.
at the same time vibrating the crap out of that stereo mono switch,
Yeah.
that's causing it to arc. The power tubes blow.
Wow.
So our fix for that was I redesigned the circuit board to make it harder for an arc. We put an arc suppressor circuit.
No
on-
kidding. Wow.
A capacitor and a diode arc
It's like you're
suppressing
playing
circuit on
chess against these other
on each power
manufacturers.
tube socket. We did that, but we also. Are you using those new Marshall cabinets with the slides? Yeah, we don't have an endorsement. They give them to us for free. Can we come over to your rehearsal place? Yeah. So I go over there with wood screws and put a wood screw in the back right and against that
Yeah.
sound post
It's not
and
gonna move
screw the
anymore.
back
Yeah.
cover to the sound post so it would stop banging on it. Problem goes away. You guys are geniuses.
Take
Like,
that
we're
thing
like-
right out,
Yeah.
rewire the cabinet to one jack, and say this is how it should have been done.
Yeah. Well, I was paranoid as shit when our 412 cabinets came out that had the stereo mono switch. We made sure that we had a positive locking rocker switch on there that wouldn't make and break contact under vibration. And
Wow.
we also had the totally sealed back that wasn't removable, so the sound post was secured to the back cover as well. So what we would go, hey, we don't have that problem with our cabs.
One
And the
extra
band would go,
screw.
Oh,
Yeah, one that's just
yeah. So actually, we started selling more 412 calves because our calves wouldn't cause the power amp to blow.
wow.
Long answer to a basically simple question. Yeah, but that's what happens. Transformer quality is not necessarily what it sounds like, but how it's made and how many shortcuts are taken in its production. And so when you say Seriatone, they are rumored to make nice sounding amplifiers, and they're affordable, and you can build kits and stuff. But they're still buying transformers from another supplier that is a Chinese supplier, and they notoriously take shortcuts to save a nickel or a dime, and they don't tell their customers that they did that. Once you approve a sample from a Chinese supplier on a part, and they feel like, okay, we've got this all nailed down, we know what they want, then they go in the background and start carefully kind of trying to take shortcuts to save them some money so they can make more profit off the product, and then basically sit back and wait until the customer goes, hey, all these parts are defective, what are you going to do about it? And then they go, okay, all right, we'll make it the way that we were supposed to be making it. And
The jig is up.
yeah, exactly.
That's so funny. All right.
It's
all right.
It's on you to figure out what the problem is and tell us that we crossed the line.
That sucks.
Yeah, well, that's the way it is.
That really sucks. Man. Well, where we at, guys?
I gotta walk my dog. I hate to be the bummer.
No,
Yeah.
that's totally all right. Is
My
the
dog
power
needs a
tube
walk, too.
distortion in attenuators, reamplifiers? Let's put this put this one up about the
This one? The one that I just put up?
yeah
That says
yeah.
question?
Yeah.
Imagine that. Formulating it as a question. That's awesome. Thank you.
Is the power tube distortion in attenuator reamplifier undesirable in contrast with power tube distortion in a power amp? Well, in both cases, power tube distortion is not occurring. So, what I want to say about that is that we tend to assign when we don't know what's really causing a cause and effect, we tend to assign the most logical sounding thing in our head or repeat what we've heard other people say about what that cause and effect is. So when people talk about power tube distortion, they're usually equating it with some kind of thing that they can understand as distortion, like it sounds distorted, it sounds dirty, as opposed to sounding clean. But distortion could take other kinds of forms, like compression, for example.
Yeah.
If power tubes are run,
Blocking distortion.
yeah.
That's
Well,
different.
if you run power tubes hard enough in a Class A B amp, a Class A B amp is Class A up to a certain point, and then it shifts to a combination of Class A and Class AB at another point, and then there's a point at which it's operating entirely Class B, and at that point, if you push the power tube hard enough, it starts to compress, and you get crossover distortion, which we've seen.
Yes.
That distortion is crossover distortion. It's not power tube distortion per se. It's pushing the tube beyond its ability to not just cause distortion. So the distortion isn't the tube distorting. The distortion is just hard to describe, but the distortion is the result of pushing the tube past a point where the bias circuit, the tube is basically turning into, this is going to get complicated, the tube is basically turning into a forward bias diode at that point, and it's just, that won't mean anything to you guys, but what it does mean is when you see on the scope, and we've showed this in videos, the crossover distortion notch in the power tubes, when you push them to the point where they're doing that, you've pushed that tube to the point where it can't amplify anymore, and it's causing current to be drawn through the tube that creates a result that sounds distorted. It's not the tube itself making a fuzzy sound. It's the tube itself drawing more current than the power supply has to deliver. The other thing that people sort of associate with power tubes as distortion is a kind of compression and limiting that happens in the output transformer. When you push the output transformer hard enough, it can no longer turn more incoming signal into output power. When you reach that point, and we've demonstrated this, the high frequency and low frequency tends to fall off.
Yeah.
And it gets more mid-focused. And that's a distortion in the sense that it's different than it was when it was clean.
So a distortion, like another definition of distortion, not like overdrivey distortion,
It's
but a distortion of the original character.
Actual
Yeah, a
distortion.
deviation
Yeah.
from normal.
Yeah, right.
Not necessarily a fuzzy deviation, but
Yeah.
just an audibly perceptible
A
deviation.
distortion of the amplifier's character.
Yeah. So, in amplifier attenuated undesirable content of the power tube distortion in a power amp, it's not undesirable unless there's too much of it. And really it depends on the design, because one of the things that can happen is if the phase inverter doesn't have enough headroom to drive the power tubes to full output, then what you're hearing isn't power tube distortion, it's phase inverter distortion. So, and we've demonstrated that. This phase inverter runs out of gas here, but the power tubes are still able to go to here.
Well, this is the whole Variac.
Yeah, and we talked about the Variac and all that. So, really what your question is the power tube distortion easier to generate in an attenuator reamp situation as opposed to running a power amp without an attenuator? And the answer is it depends on how much volume is generated by your power amp and your ability to tolerate that volume. Does it sound good to you at the volume you're playing at and doesn't piss everybody else off in the band or the club, and you can play that way without an attenuator? Then use that. But if you need an attenuator to get it down there, then it's okay to attenuate the volume of the amp, and in the bargain, if you get a little bit of characteristic distortion that you can now hear because you're not past your ear's threshold of being able to discern between what's clean and overdriven, then do that. And what I mean by that is we've demonstrated this many times. It can be, and I really think this goes back to your perception about your Hiwatt. When you started turning that amp up, trying to figure out how it sounds good, your first natural inclination was to turn it down because it was just too damn loud and it was hurting you. So you turned it down and tried to get a sonic character out of it another way, but you weren't able to do that. So that left you with the impression that there's a limitation to this amp we need to get over somehow. And we demonstrated that what the limitation was basically your fear of that much volume. You got ears that your career depends on, and you're not going to abuse them. There's that. So if you are past that threshold of pain or tolerance or the environmental limitations of the gig that you're in, then that's where the attenuator steps in and helps you solve that problem. And then you have all these other options before you that determine how much you crank up the amp. Where do you perceive the sweet spot to be? Does this work for you? Is all you were looking for is a little compression, a little more sustain, a little more sparkle, or you just wanted to dime the crap out of the thing and kick it in the balls as hard as possible just to see if it can take it, or do you like it?
Yeah.
That's a whole exploration.
Yeah.
And that's not necessarily an either or.
Sweet spot is very important. Mic pre, same thing. So there is an amp sweet spot that doesn't always necessarily work, though. And the thing about music, it's so subjective that, like we talked about the other day, you get a bass sound and you're like, this is the most ungodly bass sound, and then you use the same everything down to the bass into another band and it sounds like nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So
I love hearing that that's your experience too, because it's
Yeah,
always
it's-
my experience. But
that's why having
someone
the
of your
option.
stature.
Well, I mean, having the greatest sounding Marshall or whatever doesn't necessarily mean it's the greatest sounding Marshall in this context.
Yeah.
And when people always ask, "Hey, well, how do you EQ this?" I'm like, well, I mean, 2 dB at 10K. What does that mean when everything has 10K on it? it doesn't mean anything. So
Well, you turned me on to the particular mic pre that I'm using, the 10
the Neve 1073.
the 1073, and I discovered after playing with it what everybody goes crazy about with the 1073, which is it's a transformer coupled solid state preamp that when you push it to a certain point, you're inducing just like output transformers, you're the matching transformers in there, you're inducing those into saturation. You're pushing those to the point where you can hear them imposing their character on the sound by dint of the fact that you overloaded them, and that just happens to sound really great. Exactly the same thing in cranking an amp. So when you turned me on to that and you said, "Oh, well, this is this," and I started researching it, and I said to you, "Is that what I'm hearing? Output transformer saturation or matching transformer saturated?" And you were like, "I don't know. It just sounds good at that number." And
Exactly.
I did that research, and that's what I came up with. That was a very similar analog to cranking an amp.
I mean, to me, it's play a lick at 25, make it 0, play the same lick at 30, knock it down 5, play the same lick at 35, knock it down 10. Now they're all level matched, and listen to them. And now you're really just listening to, obviously, the difference in the lick, unless you reamp it. But just the difference in the preamp gain.
Uh-huh.
And that's going to totally change that feel, which is, it's a reactive load.
And that's a voodoo thing, and it's a mood thing, and it's a today with this band thing, and
Yeah, and
the same setting tomorrow
fit
with
this
another band. It's
context
just like,
or
nope,
not,
got to
you
start
know.
all over from scratch again.
Fire Joe.
Totally.
It worked on the demo.
Yeah. All right, guys, we got to walk a couple dogs. Graphite and cigars. We'll answer that question next time.
Thanks so much for hanging out with us.
Absolutely.
Thanks,
guys.
Joe, for hanging out with us.
Thank you for having me, man. This is very educational.
And you're gonna open up his amp this week, and we'll talk about it next time.
Yeah,
or not,
more
or-
nostalgia. More
Yeah.
Hiwatt nostalgia for us and you.
All right.
Yeah.
What is it? Team. All right. Good night,
Wonder
everybody.
Twin powers.
Yeah.
Wonder Trio powers.
Activate.
Yeah.